Good morning. There we go. Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'm so glad we've got 42 folks on the line right now. So that's pretty amazing. It's great for everybody to be here. I want to go over just a little etiquette tips, that type of thing. We had the ability to do some networking before we started the official proceedings this morning. We did get a chance for everybody, I hope, to put your name, where you're from, if you're an at-large member, your location, the latest book that you read, or some chapters even have book readings, which I think is really neat. Please feel free to continue to add those books, because, you know, just already this morning, there's some I'm definitely going to read. Just some little tips to make the meeting and your online experience more fun. Try to position the camera at eye level, so, you know, it does look like you're looking at us. You may see sometimes that I go to the side. That's because I'm using two monitors and I have the bigger presentation on the right. It doesn't mean I'm not paying attention. It just means I'm looking at the presentation. If you leave, turn off your camera. Sometimes that's helpful, because then we know that you're gone. Also, too, if you want to try, sometimes I did have an overhead light, and as I was saying, it made me look like I had a halo, which I definitely don't. And so I turned that off, and I have a small lamp in front of me. It just gives you a little bit better light, and we can like really see you. Unfortunately, I see it is giving some glare to my glasses, so sorry about that. A big thing is making sure that we have the environment nicely quiet, so the person who's speaking can be heard. So just be mindful, you know, if you have family, dogs in the background, and try to stay on mute unless you're talking. That way, if all of a sudden the kids drop all the glasses on the floor, we won't hear it, just you will have to deal with it. And the other thing too, if you could silence your personal devices, which I remembered to do this morning, if you could put them on mute, that helps a lot, because people inevitably get phone calls. What I do is I turn it off, you know, turn it on silent, and then I leave it up, so I could still monitor if someone calls me and if I want to take that call. And then if you do, please be sure to mute yourself and take your call, and then come back to see us. Another part of etiquette, we need to stay focused on agenda. Again, stay on mute until you're speaking. And we want to stay on task and avoid off-topic conversations. Now, I do realize a lot of folks will, you know, maybe want to have some personal chats going. Obviously, that's up to you. But in the chat, because I will be trying to watch it, but facilitating the meeting, watching the chat, watching the email, making sure I'm advancing the slides, I may not always see the chat. So, you know, please just kind of keep on topic. We will use the raise the hand feature. I'll monitor as well as I can, but I think most people now, our very first meeting, raising the hand was kind of a, you know, new thing for us, but I think people are getting really more adept at it. And Susan, I saw you just raised your hand. So I don't know if you wanted to speak, but I think she was demonstrating this is how you raise your hand. So you can kind of watch and know when it's your turn. I'll monitor just to kind of keep things moving. Also too, it's helpful because we have our conversations timed this year. I'm really going to try to watch and make sure we stick to those discussion times. We want everyone's voice to be heard, but we also want to move the meeting along because we have so much great stuff going on. So you can chat, and also I sent along a document that says board members, and you can also find it on the link. You can see people's emails there. And if you have a question that or comment that didn't get, widely disseminated or discussed, you can chat it and we'll try to get it to that person, or you can email that person. Again, just, it's great that we may agree. One way that if you agree with something someone says, there's little like emoji things that you can do the clap, or you can do a thumbs up. So another way to just say, hey, I agree with what you say without having to just repeat it. If you run into some issues using the chat, you can email me. I'll try to watch that and get back to you. But I just think this is going to help us all have our voices heard and stay within the time. Another thing about the meeting is we will have the opportunity to vote in the afternoon. I've created what are called polls, and we'll discuss them. There'll come a time, we'll call the vote, and then I'll put the poll up. Everyone will see those polls, but only those folks that are either a state board member, a local league president, or your local league president has asked you to be a delegate are eligible to vote. So that should be about 46 people. Now, we actually have 46 people on the phone right now. So I won't know, because I can't keep up with that, who is eligible to vote. So basically, I would say if you're eligible to vote, you would know it already. So just try to keep that in mind when you do the voting. And then we'll have the results of that poll, I think, pretty much right away. So we'll know what the answer is. Another kind of fun thing we're going to do this afternoon, about 1:20, which I'm sure we won't be exactly on time, but we'll try, is having break rooms. Now, the way these break rooms work, you'll automatically and randomly be assigned. I will see all of the folks, and like if there's 46 people, we don't want any more than like 5 people in a group. So I'll have to do math and figure out how many rooms that is. Luckily, I have a calculator, so I won't mess it up. And you will automatically be placed in your break room. When you get there, feel free to introduce yourself, tell people where you're from. It would be the time to talk about either you or your chapter's biggest achievement in relation to the League of Women Voters, and your biggest challenge. If you're an at-large member, which I hope this will be really fun for folks who are at-large members. I am from the Hopkinsville League, but often it feels at-large because I'm like 45 minutes away from Hopkinsville. It's really a great time to network with other folks in the league. So we'll really have that time to get people together. Feel free to ask for emails, that type of thing. Then you will automatically get this warning that says something like you've got 3 minutes till you end, or 1 minute till you end, and then you'll be placed back into the meeting. So you won't have to worry about going in and out. And I think that's just a great thing. So we are 5 minutes till. I think we've gone through what we need to go through. And Fran, I think we can welcome everyone.
Roy, you want to introduce our parliamentarian?
I can, or
Or you want me to?
would you mind?
Well, I'll just say that Pat Morrell has agreed to be our parliamentarian. I don't anticipate any great Robert's Rules of Order issues coming up, but Pat has agreed to serve in that capacity. So thank you, Pat.
All right. I see people are signing on. Got a ton of folks in the chat room. Fran, do we want to go ahead and get started?
I'm fine with that idea. We've got such a full agenda. I think we want to go ahead and be starting on time so we can end somewhat on time. I know everybody will be ready to leave by the end of this, I'm sure.
I don't believe there's anything I need to share from you.
Are there any questions about the procedure as we go forward before we start? Now's the time to do that little raise your hand thing.
I'd like to ask if Soraya could explain where the lower your hand button is. Raise and lower your hand button is.
Okay, if you go, where are you? To your right, there are 3 buttons. The top choice is lower your hand.
To my right? Huh.
Let me see. Hold on. Can you see? Can you raise your hand again?
Sure. I'm doing it from the bottom of my screen using the reactions button.
Okay, if you go here, and I can do it too.
Right. Here. Okay, we're not seeing your screen that you're maneuvering. We're seeing the agenda.
Okay. Well, I am trying to show the participants.
Right.
Let me quickly show you. If you hover over your right corner of you, like if you look at yourself on the Zoom, up at the top, you'll see to the right of you, you'll see mute, and then you'll see 3 little buttons. If you click on those 3 little buttons, well, my hand's not up, and you have your hand raised, then the first choice will be lower your hand.
Okay.
So that should get you lowering your hand. And also too, I can lower it. So a lot of times when I see people talking and I know they've already spoken, I'll lower the hand too, just in case. Anything else before we get started this morning? Okay. I would ask everyone to go on mute if you are not presenting or speaking, and we can go ahead and get started. Fran.
Thank you, Soraya, and good morning and welcome to the annual meeting for the League of Women Voters of Kentucky. I'm Fran Wagner, and I have the honor of serving as president of the Kentucky League. Thank you for taking time this Saturday in June to be part of our annual meeting. Your presence is a testament to your dedication to defending democracy in 2022, a time I believe fraught with clear and present danger to our democratic form of government. The Kentucky League of Women Voters is uniquely positioned and qualified to empower voters and help make democracy work by our history, nonpartisanship, and dedicated volunteers. But make no mistake, defending democracy in these perilous times is going to require a great deal of strategic planning and hard work in the days ahead. Today, along with taking care of necessary business, like the budget and bylaws adoption, election of board members, and approval of program, we hope to share with one another some strategies and tools to enable us to fulfill our mission in these challenging times. But before we get to all that, let me take a few minutes to introduce the board members of the League of Women Voters of Kentucky. And Soraya, maybe you'd put that list up now. Almost everything we send out goes out under the president's name, but I can assure you that I'm only a small part in the grand scheme of things. So let me introduce to you the people who really make your state league work. And Soraya, do you have that list?
Yeah, I'm moving it over.
It's coming, okay. Dee Pregliasco is our first VP and one of the chairs of our redistricting committee. As one of the leaders of that committee, Dee spoke to countless groups throughout the state about the importance of fair maps and the need for an open and transparent process in drawing them. Despite extraordinary efforts, we didn't win the battle this year in the legislature, but Dee and the committee are committed to continue the fight until the war is won. Bonnie Lynch is our second VP. She led the work on our voting democracy grant from National League, including a Martin Luther King Jr. voting rally in Bowling Green, where we don't even have a local league, but hope to grow one. Jennifer Fitch is our secretary. In addition to taking the minutes of board meetings and this annual meeting, she handles correspondence. So if you're kind enough to make a financial donation to the league, you'll get a note from Jennifer. Steve Senth and Richard Heine have served as treasurer and bookkeeper. No small job, as we've been able to attract more grants for our programs. They've also been helping orient Amanda Riley, who is CEO of On the Ball Services. We've contracted with them to help with much needed bookkeeping and other administrative support. Soraya Assar, you have met. She's our communications chair, and this is a dynamic group. Thanks to them, we have a terrific website, Facebook, social media outreach, and a PR lens through which all of our activities are publicized. They're also leading the whole board as we learn and adapt, some of us kicking and screaming, streamlined internal communications that are absolutely necessary for future growth. In this process, we've been blessed by Lexington member Brittany Strobe, who through weekly Zoom meetings has been tutoring us on the use of all things Google. Verna Cahoon is our education chair. This committee has a wealth of expertise in the field of public education, focusing this year on racial discipline disparities and providing information and advice to our state legislative liaisons regarding education liaison or legislation. Verna, for example, testified before the Senate Education Committee regarding the bill requiring what history teachers should include in their curriculum. Nikki Chambers is our natural resources chair. Nikki also helped our legislative liaisons in formulating positions on environmental legislation during this year's session. Cindy Heine wears so many hats that I don't know where to begin. I'll just mention two now. She, along with Mary Jo Rogers, is our legislative liaison, and with Dee and Susan Weston chaired our redistricting committee. Jennifer Jackson is our voter service chair and a key part of our communications efforts, including Outreach Circle. I'm proud to announce that Jen is one of only 5 league members from throughout the United States who has been asked to speak at National Convention about her vision for the league's future. Becky Jones leads the Northern Kentucky State Administrative League. We're thrilled to have this fairly new league and the members who have jumped into league activities and leadership. Jules Marquardt, with Cindy Heine, is a debate forum coordinator. You'll be hearing more from Jules today as the budget committee chair. She will be retiring from the board at the end of June, but we're deeply appreciative of all of her hard work during the last few years. Mary Jo Rogers serves as legislative liaison with Cindy Heine. She has Frankfurt in her blood, having been raised there and worked there. Although she lives in Louisville now. Harriet Seiler is our healthcare chair and provided guidance for our legislative liaisons concerning healthcare bills. Harriet also manages our Facebook page. And Mayor Ward leads the Bell County League and as such is our liaison with Southeast Kentucky. Susan Weston, along with Dee and Cindy, led our redistricting efforts. Susan's very special contribution to that campaign was to master the software necessary to draw redistricting maps based on geography and fair representation. Thanks to Susan, we were able to go to the public and legislators with our maps and say, see, there is a better way to do this. And Karen Brown has done double duty as chair of the nominating committee and working with Pat Morrell on membership. I'm pleased to announce that Karen will be taking on a new challenge. We've just learned this week that we will be receiving a $10,000 Making Democracy Work grant from the League of Women Voters of the United States. And Karen has agreed to lead our efforts to fulfill the purposes of that grant, which fit perfectly with our proposed program. In sum, it's a terrific group to work with, and it's been my honor to serve as president with them. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Melissa Currents. Melissa is a National League board member and is Kentucky's liaison to the National Board. This is made easier by the fact that she doesn't live very far away. She's from Cincinnati, and she's been working with us for the last 3 years. In fact, she attended our last in-person convention prior to COVID in Hopkinsville. Melissa, I know there's a lot going on at National right now with convention right ahead. What would you like to share with us today?
Thanks, Fran. I appreciate the time, and I'm so excited to be with you all today. I'm so impressed with all the work that Kentucky's doing, and I'm proud to have been with you in person in Hopkinsville. And I definitely attended a convention that was at the Shaker Village, and I don't remember what year that was, but I'm excited to be with you all today. So as Fran already mentioned, there's so much happening at National League. And I do want to share some of the kind of top level activities that we're working on. And then I'm happy to answer questions either verbally or in the chat, whichever you prefer. What I'll do is I'll kind of talk through some things, and then afterwards I'll put all the resources in the chat so you can find those later where things are on the league's website. So first of all, I am in Cincinnati, so I'm not too far. I am serving right now on the as the bylaws chair for convention. So if you have questions around bylaws before we get to convention, happy to answer those, and then also any questions that come up following convention, also happy to answer. I just wanted to say that I joined the league when I was 18 because I was so inspired by the work that the history of the organization. So I'm so glad to see that that Kentucky is strong and that you're taking the mantle and doing this hard work to protect voters and defend democracy. So I came to you, if any of you remember, I did a presentation on the Young People's Task Force from LWVUS many moons ago. So, having those young people join the league is very important. So just some updates from LWVUS. As you may know, there's the new programming focus at the National League around women power democracy. And since the 2020 election, we've seen new barriers to voting and continued attacks on our democracy that require a renewed organizational investment. Women power democracy is a four-pronged approach to tackle systematic challenges to voting rights through advocacy, litigation, and organizing. These league-led programs will build trust in our elections, grow our electorate with equity, create fairness for voter access, and ensure community districting reflects our population. So there's 4 buckets around this. There's the Democracy Truth Project, which counters mis and disinformation and advancing better public understanding of the democratic and electoral process. We do this through research, partnerships on mis and disinformation, public messaging campaigns, training and experimental learning opportunities, and civic education. There's also another bucket of called expanding the franchise, where we're increasing voter participation through our vote401.org platform, voter registration, voter education, and mobilization programs with a focus on an underrepresented populations. Another big bucket of work at national is our Democratic Defense Fund, which protects voting rights and advancing a more equitable democracy through advocacy and voter protection efforts. We are counteracting voter suppression in all the states, voter protection activities, and advocacy for pro-democracy policies. And then another big bucket of work that you all are familiar with is the people-powered fair maps, leading with advocacy, public education, and organizing to create fair, transparent, people-powered processes and eliminating partisan and racial gerrymandering during the 2021 and 2022 redistricting processes. So I will put a link to that work in the chat. I also just want to highlight some tools that are available to your local league. And I know that you all are already plugged in so much to Outreach Circle. So there's a lot of resources on Outreach Circle. If you have questions, the staff and even the volunteers here in Kentucky, I'm sure can help if you have questions around that. I will put in the chat the impact on issues, especially if you're maybe newer to the league. The impact on issues is the national list of all the program and programming that LWVUS has that is designed to help league leaders use LWVUS public policy positions effectively at the state and local levels. And so it will be updated again after convention with any decisions that the delegates make during that event. Just want to do a quick shout out around the LWV semi-annual league survey. And so as we move into this important work, we want to have a focus on our future and understanding what leagues are doing right now is critical to tell our impact story. So if you all get updates around the league semi-annual survey, it's really helpful as we make decisions and plans going forward in the future. But as you know, there's so much reactive activities as well. And, there's always litigation that is popping up across the country to protect voters. It's happening every week. There is a lot of work around reacting to the January 6th, understanding all that happened on January 6th, even with, things are unfortunately always coming up with gun violence prevention. LWVUS is working on advocacy against that, climate change, and anything that, you all are working in Kentucky, we are also working around the country on. There's the anticipated SCOTUS ruling on the Roe v. Wade that the league is working to organize around as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions around that. Convention, I'm so excited to have Jen Jackson be on the stage during convention. So I'm sure you all will be excited to see her. I will as well. We are going to be in person and virtual at the same time, so it's a hybrid convention. I know that I believe that all the delegates have been chosen already. So if you're a delegate, you know who you are. But if you're curious to understand all that, because there's a lot of internal kind of work that will be happening at this convention, and I'll put the link in the chat around the structure transformation that LWVUS is proposing, and so I'll put that in the chat. And then I just want to also let you know that I am, this is my 4th year as the Kentucky liaison. I will be transitioning if the delegates vote me in to be the nominating committee chair for LWVUS. So I'll be leaving the board at the end of the month, but I'm sure that you all will get a great leader from LWVUS. I don't know if maybe they'll be from Cincinnati, I'm not sure, but it's been so great to just be able to drive down and see you all in person. But I'm always here. My email will still be active because I'll be on nominating committee. So I'll make sure I put that in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. That's kind of all I had to share. So I'll pass it back to you, Fran.
Thanks so much, Melissa. And yes, if you have questions for Melissa, put them in the chat. We will follow up on those. And we have some wonderful delegates who are going to National Convention and, well, going in person, and also some that will be doing it virtually. And we really look forward to hearing the reports back from them, because they're going to be making some important changes, I think, is what it looks like. So thanks, Melissa, for everything. All right, we're going to move ahead then to our first business session. What we do is this first session, we're going to present in this first session, first of all, the budget, and then the nominating committee report, the bylaws recommendation, and the program recommendations. This will be a time for presentation and questions. And then at the end of this meeting, we're going to come back, reconvene, and we're going to, and that's when we'll vote. That's when we'll have the vote on the issues. So at this point, we're doing the presentation and questions, and we're going to start with the budget. And Jules Marquardt is our budget committee chair. And Jules, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Fran. Good morning to everyone. I present this report on behalf of the Budget Committee, whose other members are Becky Jones, Richard Heine, and Steve Sant, who is the treasurer who serves ex officio. You may remember that at last year's annual meeting, the board made changes to our bylaws and to our 2 budgets to simplify them. What was the general fund has been renamed the Special Projects Fund. The Special Projects Fund was retained as a 501c4 entity to account for grant funds that might come from a 501c4 source that requires lobbying or advocacy for specific legislation. The other fund, the Education Fund, is a 501c3 entity, and it's the League's primary budget for all ongoing operations. I'd like to remind everyone that both funds are nonpartisan, but under IRS rules, not more than 20% of the funds of a 501c3 organization can be used to lobby or advocate for specific legislation. So let's start with our Special Project Fund budget. If you will look at the top, you will see that this budget has been simplified greatly. Our main sources of income during the past year have been the 3 grants and a gift from the League of Women Voters US. Moving down into expenses, for activities on the 3 grants, the 3rd column, which I hope you can see, shows the outstanding grant money yet to spend before the end of the fiscal year or early in fiscal year 22-23. We expect reconciliation of the remaining expenses and reimbursement from them within a few months. On the balance sheet at the bottom of the page, it shows the $24,000 that was transferred to the education fund with the bylaw changes. We are happy to report that a comfortable balance of over $9,800 remains. The board directly approves the 501c4 budget and has already done so, so there will be no vote on it later at the business meeting. Now, let's move on to the education.
Well, let's first ask, are there any questions about the Special Projects Fund? Are there any, and this is where you do the raise your hand thing, if there's any questions about the Special Projects Fund. I'm not seeing anything. Are you seeing anything, Soroya?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, I think we can move on to the Education Fund then.
Thank you. Okay, this is our proposed budget for all ongoing operations. If we will begin it with the income, and I'm going to point out some of the major kind of changes or highlights. You will notice in column 2 that our total income for this year was over $35,000 or $10,000 more than we projected. In particular, fundraising and donations were much higher due to 2 large unexpected gifts that we don't expect to be repeated this year. And for the next fiscal year, we expect donations to be more similar to what they had been in past years. Highlighting some big income items. We plan to hold an in-person annual meeting with a Friday evening dinner and speaker and Saturday meetings with lunch. The projected income from registration and other fees is expected to be $3,750. We expect this to be a break-even event and show equal expenses of $3,750 below. Okay, the KSET grant from the Kentucky Civic Engagement Table helps support the redistricting forms provided around the state, and that grant will not be repeated in the next year. Also, we received a gift from the New Venture organization. It's a national organization for media ads to support restoration of voting rights. That also is not expected to be repeated. So if we can move down to expenses, the major changes, administrative services, the State League has contracted with Amanda Riley for administrative services of 30 hours a month for an annual total of $7,200. Under general administration, fees for MailChimp and Zoom have been added to this category that also covers regular office expenses. Under LWVUS Council, there will be a national council next year with 2 delegates from Kentucky. Under office rent and administration, there's a slight increase in what is paid to the Louisville League due to a personnel salary raise. Restoration of voting rights is a major program emphasis in the year ahead, and with the corresponding budget that will be needed. Also, the new fiscal year will have statewide elections, So $3,000 has been allocated for voting awareness and registration and candidate forums. The Budget Committee proposes a balanced budget of $29,532 for the next fiscal year. This is the budget to be voted on at the business meeting. Let's just move down to the balance sheet, the next page. Okay, at the beginning of the fiscal year, there was a transfer of $24,000 from the former general fund. Also, the board voted to move that amount into an investment fund, the Bluegrass Community Foundation, so that we could gain interest rather than being dormant. So under the Education Fund investment account, you will see that unfortunately, we suffered a small loss in this account, which represents how the markets have done nationally. And this is a 6% loss, but it has been less than other US investments. So the remaining balance in the education fund is $35,483. The Budget Committee is pleased to announce that the League of Women Voters of Kentucky assets in its two funds total over $45,000. And the State League is in sound financial condition.
Thanks, Jules. All right, now I'm going to ask if there are any questions about our operating budget, which is this ed fund budget. Do we have any questions about the budget as Jules presented it?
I see no hands raised.
Okay, well, Jules, you must have done just a super job of explaining everything.
It actually was good. I was able to follow it, so you did really well, Jules.
And actually, there's a question in the chat from Chip that has disappeared, but I can't see what it is. So would he like to ask or?
And then we have some hands raised. Becky had her hand raised. I see Luann too.
Okay.
Oh, I was just reading Tip's question. Explain the new ventures gift expenses, please.
I'm not sure that okay.
Tip could probably answer that himself.
Yeah, Chip, why don't you go on and explain that? What has been spent and what is left to spend?
Oh, so New Ventures is just that, New Ventures. It's not the organization New Ventures. That I'm confused as to exactly what it means.
Well, we got the money from whom then, Tip? We thought that we got it from New Ventures, right?
Yes.
Which is the national organization.
I'm totally unfamiliar with New Ventures, so I'm asking from complete ignorance here.
If this was the $7,500 that we got from the group that supported our efforts on restoration of voting rights that we used at the last minute for. Yeah,
Gotcha.
so this is a national organization that we have worked with in terms of our advocacy for restoring voting rights. And
Got it. I just didn't know what it was called and how it was.
yeah, it was
okay.
It was a gift. It was not a grant, and we used it for Facebook promotions to promote some of our ads and GIFs.
We have two more. We have Luann and then we had Jen. Let's make those quick. We're at the end for the discussion of the budget. So Luann, can you please go forward?
Yeah, I was just, when I was looking at the budget, and I can't see it now because you've got the screen, but there was something in there about Stripe and something go up a little bit.
Oh, I can explain
Probably
that.
Squarespace fees.
Right. It's in the other budget.
This one?
Yeah, it's in the main.
There it is,
budget.
Stripe Squarespace fees.
I can explain that easily. Previously, we put that in under income, but it was actually negative income. It's the fees that we pay when we get donations through Stripe and Squarespace. So what we have done this year and going forward, we've moved that to the expense category. Because
That would be my next question, then, because that's really an expense. So,
It
okay,
is.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen?
Actually, I don't have a question. Sorry.
Okay, all right, great. If there are any more questions or comments, please feel free to chat to Jules individually or to send her an email. We will now move on, and Karen Brown is going to talk about the nominating committee report, and let me put that up.
While you're doing that, Troy, and while Karen's getting ready, let me just say that one of the Soraya sent out a list of the board members with our email addresses. There was an earlier version sent out that you might have downloaded that had an incomplete. All of us have an email address, which is our name and then LWVKY.org. But in the earlier list sent out, it was my mistake. I left off the KY. So it just said LWV.org. So if you have that, be sure to add the KY, because the National League is the LWV. We're LWVKY. So
And there was an email that went out this morning with all of the updated documents. And of course, you can always use the link to our Google Space. That'll have the latest in there. So if you use all the documents or the link from this morning's email, you'll have the proper email and everything. So Karen.
Thank you. On behalf of the nominating committee, we recommend the following 6 members be elected as directors to the board of the League of Women Voters for Kentucky for a 2-year term starting July 1st, 2022, running through June 30th, 2024. And these members are Soraya Asar, Hopkinsville, Verna Cahoon, Louisville, Nikki Chambers, Hopkinsville, Jennifer Jackson, Lexington, Mary Jo Rogers, Louisville, and Susan Weston, Danville. Additional work by the nominating committee was done that recommends Pat Morrell replace me as nominating committee chair for the 22-23 fiscal year. So these are elected board of directors, and we will vote on them at the end of the meeting. After that, the elected board members will appoint 6 additional directors. Part of the work of the nominating committee starting after this meeting will be searching for officers of the board who will need to be filled next year. We have 2 nominating committee members. They will finish their 2-year term this year, Valerie Veers and Anita Simmons. They still have 1 year to serve. Does anyone have any questions about the nominating committee report?
Let me check. I do not see any hands raised.
Thank you.
Okay. Then, according to our agenda, Harriet, I think you're next.
Harriet? Do you
You might want to unmute, Harriet. We're still not hearing you. You're muted. You're still muted.
We heard you before, Harriet, so I'm sure you're there.
Yeah, I've sent a message to unmute. Maybe that would help.
Right.
Is that, I think I'm okay now.
You're good now. Yep.
I had to find myself in a string of pictures. Okay. I am giving the bylaws committee report. The bylaws committee recommends that the name of the league's 501c3 corporation be changed from the League of Women Voters of Kentucky Education Fund, Inc. to the League of Women Voters of Kentucky, Inc. And here's the note or explanation. We'll vote in the afternoon, of course. This name change reflects the bylaws adopted at last year's convention, state convention, in which we converted the League's education fund to our primary operational entity. Reserving our 501c4 corporation for special projects involving substantial lobbying for specific legislation. And the only follow-up is we know that this name change has to, once voted on, if approved, must be processed through the Secretary of State's office and with the IRS. Are there any questions? It's the end of my report.
I don't see any hands raised. And I don't see any chats.
Okay, well, this is just tidying up what we did last year. We changed the bylaws, but we forgot to change the name. So it's just following up on that. Okay, well, that's great. We moved through that business session, I think, efficiently. If we've got a little break.
Fran, we do have Bonnie.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, how could I forget program? I'm sorry. Yes, we need program. Sorry. Okay, Bonnie.
No problem. No problem. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. The 2022-23 proposed program. The League of Women Voters of Kentucky Board of Directors respectfully submit the following program for FY 2022-23 for their adoption at the 2022 annual meeting. Number one, the restoration of voting rights for those previously convicted of a felony. 2, voter education with emphasis on providing information about when, where, and how to vote, particularly in light of Kentucky's new elections laws and regulations. Building and promoting voter information on Vote 411, providing information about the 2 proposed constitutional amendments. Number 3, increase in voter turnout, particularly new and underserved voting populations. 4, equitable public school education as a foundation for equal engaged citizenship. And 5, exploration of ranked choice voting. And there's a note. It's important that, of course, the programs don't exceed the amount of money and volunteer service that we have. Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Bonnie.
I see Patty's hand is raised.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, I really applaud the exploration of ranked choice voting, and I wonder if that's going to go hand in hand with looking at nonpartisan primaries as well. I know some groups recommend that those two kind of go together.
Cindy, can you elaborate on that one? Because
we did not put those together, Patty, but it's something we certainly could consider.
Yeah, I don't know if it'd have to even be, added to the program. It might be something that would just be part of that research, but I know a lot of organizations have recommended those two things as really helping with our democratic process.
Gail, I see your hand is raised if you want to go ahead and unmute. Gail, we're having some audio issues.
No.
You know what? Can you put your comment in the chat and I'll read it out? Dee, do you want to go ahead?
I was just going to say, in answer to Patty's question, the people that we've talked to about ranked choice voting, we can, before we ask them to possibly educate us, we could ask them about that, about nonpartisan primaries, and to see what information they have about that.
Gail has a nice question. This may be a new topic for folks. Can one of the speakers talk to us a bit about what is ranked choice voting?
Well, I'll weigh in since I'm already on. That's part of the problem, is we don't understand it very well. I think we have an idea from reading things, hearing things, knowing what they did in New York. But basically, you're voting for people, and based upon the results, they become ranked, and so you don't have to worry about the party issue. It's just whoever people think are best, and then depending upon what the requirements are on the results, there could be basically runoffs that you vote, or maybe even within the process, you do 1, 2, and 3 as your choices. And again, that's the extent of my knowledge about it.
There's 3 hands raised. I have Susan, Mary Hughes, and Marilyn. Can you guys go in that order?
Sure. I'll speak with confidence to the ranked choice concept, which is no matter how many candidates there are for a job, you go through and rank them from 1 to the lowest number. When the votes are tallied, the lowest candidate's number is removed. People who rank those first, and their second choice gets their votes. And what that results in particularly is if you want a candidate with very strong and distinctive positions, you can show that as your first vote, but the vote tallying will then move you over maybe to a more moderate person or to a more consensus person to get you to a majority. It skips the runoffs. It can work, leaving party to just be something people know when they pick candidates. But it's thought of as reducing some of the polarization because people can show, I want this, but this would be okay. I want this, but this would be good, and this would be okay. So it's an alternative to our winner take all, you get one shot version, which is closing out some options.
Mary, you're next, if you could unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks. The League of Women Voters in Lexington has had a program on ranked choice voting in the fall, and it is on our website, LWVLexington.com, under community forums, and it's very informative. So you might want to look at that.
Marilyn, can you unmute yourself?
Yes. My question is part of the program for the state league, does that include any candidate forums for like congressional candidates, or is that strictly left to the local leagues?
I will answer that. The way we do the candidate forums is that the state league does statewide races, and then the local leagues take care of their area. So let's say in Louisville, the Louisville League would do the 3rd district congressional race, but the state league would do, all of the governors and all of those statewide races. Jen or Cindy, do you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add is that with congressional races, those are would have to follow state rules, statewide rules, but the local leagues could conduct forums or debates for congressional candidates.
Okay, any other questions? Well, I definitely heard the idea on exploration of ranked choice voting, that we might want to also explore nonpartisan primaries. And I think that might be very appropriate. There is a group, is there not? And I'll turn to my voter service people like Jen and Cindy, that there is a group that is willing to provide, I know they came to Louisville meeting too, provide a program on ranked choice voting. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we can, if anybody, if people are interested in that, we could definitely provide a liaison to that.
Doesn't Louisiana have ranked choice voting?
I don't know if Louisiana does, but I do know Maine does. Maine has ranked choice voting. And then many localities do, cities do. But Maine's the only state that I know that does ranked choice. Although California might, I'm not sure.
All right. I don't see any more hands. Let me check the chat. There's a couple in there. Oh, Tip says Alaska and New York City may as well. Becky has a nice link in there. Wow. Utah. Wow. So I guess it's not as uncommon as I kind of thought it might be. So very interesting. We did have this time scheduled until 10:50, which means we have 3 more minutes, or we can add 3 more minutes to our break. So I'm going to vote for 3 more minutes for our break and reconvene at 10:55. There's no ranked choice on that. I just made an executive decision. So let's go ahead and take a quick break. I'm sure we're all ready. Walk around and I will meet everybody back at 10:55.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's nice to see so many members on. Go ahead to the next screen. We are going to give you a fast update on the legislative process. And then we're going to put our report on the legislature to the board in the materials for you to read later. And then we'll have Soraya email them to you also. We had a legislative committee this year, was extraordinarily helpful. We met weekly and talked about what was happening, what we needed to do, what action alerts need to go out. We also were able to use a Bill Track 50, a fairly new program for us. Becky Jones mastered it and was able to keep a good list of what we supported and didn't support on our website for people to access. And we thank everyone for their calls to the legislature this year. That was very helpful. As you know, our priority this year was redistricting. Unfortunately, this is an example of the result. Congressional District 1 was gerrymandered to bring Franklin County into it. So it goes from the Mississippi to the Kentucky River. It also gerrymandered District 6 and added many more rural or conservative counties to the district. And so we consider that a problem. That has gone to court and we will see what the courts rule. We really appreciated all the work on redistricting, including Susan's maps. We're very proud of that work, but we have more work to do and we'll be asking you to help us throughout the next 8 to 10 years to continually remind people that we need a new process. Next slide. Another priority was education. We asked for expanding preschool. That did not happen. The full day kindergarten funding did pass. We were pleased with that. Related to education bills, we opposed the charter school funding and tax credit for vouchers bill, House Bill 9. That was passed. It was vetoed, but the veto was sustained on the first vote, overridden on the second vote after a little arm twisting a couple of days later. Senate Bill 138 was the replacement for those critical race theory bills that were so bad. This one, instead of saying basically what you can't teach, said what you should teach. And it was the Senate's way of getting something passed without those two, or actually there were three egregious bills. That bill also removed school-based decision-making authority and passed it on to superintendents. And it also placed limits on the Jefferson County School Board. That was passed, it was vetoed, and it was overwritten. Next slide. We supported voting in elections. In particular, we supported the expansion of voting access in no excuse absentee voting by 3 days. The bills that would have extended voting hours would have allowed for same-day voter registration, and expanded no excuse voting beyond 3 days did not pass. In fact, they didn't even see any action. So we were pleased with House Bill 564. And Susan will be describing those details later. Observations. This session provided very limited opportunity for public scrutiny and input. There is a rule that every bill should have 3 readings. That used to be done after bills were heard in committee, but that changed this year. The 3 readings happened prior to the committee hearings. Bills then were seen in the committees with substitutes filed that nobody had the opportunity to see. And the bills often went to the House or Senate floor that very same day for action, meaning there was no opportunity for public input. And there was also limited time to testify. And often, as Verna Cahoon experienced, people were asked to speak on the committee substitutes that no one had seen. So we were very discouraged by that. And it's just one of those things that has happened when you've got a really strong representation of the committees that are in charge. Next slide. There were also changes in the rules. The committees always used to get all the bills, but now the House and Senate leadership decide which bills will be heard and sends them to committees. So the House leadership makes all decisions. They do not go to committee chairs. Committee chairs get what leadership sends them. And then the frequent use of suspending the rules, that happened all the time. They set their own rules, but they suspend them on a regular basis. We also saw several bills that were exact language from ALEC bills. ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council, a national conservative group that is recommending legislation across the board, across the country. And we've heard that some of those bills were asked to be filed by legislators. And even though LRC staff might have said, well, that doesn't work very well in Kentucky, they wanted the exact ALEC language. So that ALEC is influencing what's happening in Kentucky a lot. And then the other thing that we noticed, and I think this was an ALEC influence, in several bills, strong penalties were included for not following the rules, and that's been unusual. So sometimes there were misdemeanor charges or even felony convictions or fines. Now, none of those bills passed, fortunately, but I think we'll see more of that in the future, and that's a problem. Next slide. One of the things we're going to ask you to do, and I'll give you some more specific directions when we get to restoration of voting rights, which will be our primary objective in 2023, is we'd like you to get to know your legislators before the legislative session. We want you to find out what their priorities are, ask them about automatic restoration of voting rights, and remind them that we need a better process for redistricting. We need to start right now to tell legislators that we need a better process. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn this over to Dee, and she's going to talk to you about the constitutional amendments that will be on the ballot this year and what we're going to be doing about them.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I put in the chat, but I just wanted to say this in regards to the bill that affected the Jefferson County School Board. The school board voted at their last meeting that they're going to sue over that bill because it just affects Jefferson County, no other county's school board. So I wanted you to have that information. All right, in regards to the constitutional amendments, let me give you a little background. And the background is this. People don't pay much attention to these constitutional amendments, regardless of how very, very serious they are. And so in part of our educating voters over the next few months, educating ourselves, educating our friends and families, is to make sure that they understand about these two constitutional amendments. They have profound effects, in my opinion, regardless of when you read them, you think, oh, well, one's more important than the other. They both are very, very important. This first one, as you can see here, the language is, are you in favor of amending the Constitution of Kentucky by creating a new section of the Constitution to be numbered section 26A to state as follows? And of course, this is the abortion amendment. To protect human life, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to secure or protect a right to abortion or require the funding of abortion. Now, this seems very simple as far as the language, but of course, the repercussions of this are significant all around, as well as the fact that Kentucky has passed some trigger laws in regards to abortion based upon the anticipation that, in fact, the Supreme Court of the United States is going to reverse Roe v. Wade. One of the things, and I believe is, I don't know if it's on the next piece of paper that you're going to put up, but you can go to House Bill 91 from the yeah, there it is. No, excuse me, that's the wrong section, I think. Yeah. All right, we'll go to House Bill 91 from the 2021 General Assembly to see all of the particular laws that have been passed about abortion and make sure that you understand all the details. Because one of the things that's critical is there were all these other bills passed about abortion, and you have to look at all of the definitions that are involved. And you can see how far-reaching this amendment itself, as well as these other bills, are. So, and someone else has put a link to the bills is in the handout. That's right. I'm sorry. I thought it was going to be up on the screen. So thanks, Cindy, for that. The national position on this, of course, is that this comes under women's health care, and therefore we support that we don't want Roe v. Wade overturned, and we certainly don't support this amendment. The problem will be in regards to the elections this fall is this particular amendment is going to bring out voters that might not normally vote or might not pay attention. And that might be true on both sides. You know, the real issue for us here is to really make sure people understand the importance of the amendment. All right, next one. And this is a proposed amendment that affects the General Assembly. And on the handouts that you've also gotten, you'll see House Bill 4, which was enacted last year, as well as definitions. This is a much more complicated amendment for purposes of voters, but in other words, it's long. It's like what? It's like about 12. You can see here 12 sentences, and the question will be whether people pay attention to it at all, even vote for it one way or the other. So then, again, the people who are for it or opposed to it would be the primary voters. And so it would be, the expectation would be these numbers would be very small, but it would still have a chance of passing. If you look at it, what it really involves is the legislature, which of course is dominated, has a supermajority of the Republicans. There is a Democratic governor, And this is a continuation of their efforts to have their own power be increased, though some of them would say it's taking back power from the executive. However, you know, one of the things to always remember is in the separation of powers that is so crucial to our constitutional framework, both statewide as well as nationally, is that these powers should be more or less as much equal as possible. But what this particular amendment would do basically is to take power away from the governor, which they don't like, giving them the right to meet more days, to call themselves into session, and do what they want to do, not having to wait for, of course, for the governor to call them into session. So to give you an example, last fall, they kept wanting the governor to call a special session on redistricting. That was not done. So of course they had to do redistricting in the session that began in January. We heard some rumors that, well, of course, the governor didn't want to do that because then if they got redistricting out of the way, that would just give them more days to do terrible things, which it's quite obvious they don't need more days to do terrible things because they can do terrible things anyway in the time that they have. So this particular amendment will take more sort of looking at to see if you basically understand what's going on here. But you can read it for yourself. Read the two links that you've got, the House Bill 4 and the definitions. And, you know, the devil's in the details, and that's where the definitions that are affected by the First Amendment involving abortion, as well as this one, become critical. And again, this is another reason why it's really hard for people to get involved and engaged with amendments because of that. You might remember that several years ago, we had, I believe it was Macy, I can't remember if it was Macy or Megan's law. There was
Marcy's law.
Yeah, right. And it was passed as an amendment, but then it was thrown out because of the language. But then, of course, it got passed again. Well, that might be better than having, obviously, it bad the first time. But again, if the legislature would do what they need to do and be specific and be careful with the language and be careful with definitions, then we wouldn't have those particular issues. So you might have some questions about this, and I don't know if there's some in the chat, but we're going to have to do some real education about all of this. And you see here the resources that you can use, as well as the handouts. But if anybody has any questions, Cindy and I, and even Susan, who's our real constitutional scholar, could answer them.
Dee, we do have one from Harriet. The question is, what were the implications of bills that so often added and declaring an emergency?
What happens when a bill has an emergency clause is they become effective as soon as they are signed by the governor. Generally, bills are given 90 days before they go into effect, and that gives the government agencies who have to implement those bills the opportunity to get all their ducks in a row before they actually implement. For example, with the abortion bill this time, that bill went into effect immediately, and the entities in the Cabinet for Human Resources that had to prepare forms and documents to comply with the law had no time to do that. It's another one of those ALEC kinds of things, I believe. And it's a way people who are passionate about their issues want to get stuff to happen immediately. Let me add two other comments. One, constitutional amendments take a 2/3 vote of the House and Senate to get them on the ballot, and then it takes a majority vote in the election. Passing constitutional amendments is a serious business. To amend our Constitution, we should take a lot of work, but if we actually do it, then if we decide that that is not a good idea, undoing it is very difficult. So I want to point that out. And then I want to make a plea again, and I added it to the chat room, that we would love to have volunteers to help us with our legislative team next session. Those sessions were extraordinarily helpful and very informative. And we need more help with that kind of work. And then if you would like to help us as we work to create the language on these amendments for Vote 411 and for our purposes of advocacy, please let us know, because the more people engage, the better the work. Thank you much.
This is great. To keep us on track, we are about almost 10 minutes past time for this. This was an excellent discussion. I would remind you when Cindy mentioned about being able to contact them, the slides have all their contact information there. I believe there's an Outreach Circle QR code that you can scan and find information. And then you also had the handouts. I see Patty has her hand raised. If you could maybe put your comment in chat and direct it to the speakers, we'll go ahead and move on and let Susan Weston have her time. And Susan, I believe you are going to share your own screen and you should be able to do that.
That is correct. Is it visible now?
Not to me.
Fascinating. Okay.
Hold on. It just may be me.
Sarai, I think you have to get rid of your screen share so she can share.
No, she has permissions. Multiple people can share at
Yeah.
once.
Okay. I have done everything I know how to do, Soraya. So
Now try again.
There we go.
now I'm visible.
Yes. Yes.
Hi. Good morning, and I'm glad to be here. This is a slideshow I've been working on for many of us to present. So it's designed for multiple presenters. It does have notes I'm not going to show you. So every time there's a claim about a statute, the statute is listed. And I'm hoping to recruit people to think, yes, this is a thing I'd like to be ready to share with people in my own part of the state. This is a presentation focused on voting rights basics and how the law fits together with the changes that have been made over the last 2 years. There's some we haven't, maybe even 3, that we haven't absorbed, but I'm going to try to make it be about the really basic stuff, right? Checking that your voter registration is up to date, the photo ID requirements, the fact that we now have 4 voting options that people need to choose from and have some confidence they know what they are, being clear about locations, and always helping people near you understand these questions and be participants in our democracy. So those are the questions that I invite people to be thinking about as I share the basic stuff. Beginning with voter eligibility. You can vote in Kentucky if you're a citizen and a Kentucky resident, if you will be 18 or over at the next November general election and do not claim the right to vote in another state, have not been found mentally incompetent, and either have not been convicted of a felony or have had your rights restored. I've got 2 detailed notes there that I put separately so we could double back to them. Serious point. If you are 17 in May, you can vote if you will be 18 by election day. My daughter, who was born on October 23rd, did that. People will try to think it can't quite mean that, so I underline it. Also, if you have been convicted of a felony, you can have your rights restored. You can participate as a full citizen, and a place to get information about that is civilrightsrestoration.ky.gov. You will see at the bottom that I've got the link for registration. I'm doing that kind of obsessively because I want this exact layout to work for us as images we can share on social media. So there's a little redundancy so that if we're using just one, people can still get the information. To register to vote, the easy path for registering is to use the govotky.com link and choose new updated registration. All you need to put in there is name, address, birth date, and social security number. And then you'll want to watch for a confirmation card saying your application has been accepted, which will also give you information on where to vote. Deadline for the coming election is October 11th to get that registration done. You can also register in the more traditional ways. There's a classic voter registration postcard. You can get one, fill it out, and mail it into the address on the card. Or you can give the card to someone conducting a voter registration drive, or you can turn the card in at your county clerk's office. In the modern age, you can do it on your device in the next 2 minutes is, I think, the right one to prioritize, but people should know the other methods still work. If you think you're registered, I urge you to check again. That's also easy to do at govoteky.com. And you can use that to update your address if you move, update your name if you change it legally, and spot and fix any mistaken changes or removals. This is the moment of people being scared of dirty tricks. So I've got a whole blue box about when something could be changed that you didn't ask to have changed. And there are 3 processes in the law. The first is, if voting officials get a report that you have moved within the county, they can update your address. That won't make you unable to vote, but it might change where you can vote and which local elections you can vote in. So you want to spot that if they do that, meaning to help you, so that you can change it back if somehow it's not correct. Your voter registration can be removed immediately based on a death certificate, a felony conviction, a finding of mental incompetence, or registering to vote in another state. None of those are easy to fake. Those are very official actions that can be well traced. I don't think it's very scary, but if you had an extremely common name, like say Susan Jones, I think there probably is a little extra risk. Margie, I would guess there aren't many folks with your last name that people would misunderstand, but I'd be alert and I'd check for that. Much more slowly, you can be removed from the rolls if you have moved out of your county and there's a detailed process followed. A mailing is sent to your address asking if you moved. There's a waiting period through 2 federal elections. And after that, you can be removed if they've never heard from you. Crucially, if you answer the mailing, they can't take you off the rolls. If you vote even once in a federal election or a state or local election during that waiting period, they can't remove you. So there is a real possibility of voter purges, but I think it's very small chance of anybody being removed who should not be removed. As an example of legitimate removals, I went through the published address a couple of years ago for my county, and every name I knew they had moved out of state. So we should all be wary. So far, I don't think this is a point of plotting and danger, but being diligent and checking our own registration is how we'd spot it if anything was wrong. New rules in Kentucky, the identification you show to vote has to be a photo ID. And the ID, there are 5 categories of sources. State government and US government, very easy. If you've got a driver's license or a passport, you're covered. Photo ID from any part of our defense establishment will also work. Photo ID from a college or university or technical or professional school at the post-secondary level in the US will work. And any kind of local government within Kentucky will work. But that still, it needs to be a photo ID, and some things people have used in the past will not work. I think that's an important piece of letting people know and being willing to help anyone who's going to have a little struggle with that, so that they know and so they have multiple chances and help if they need it to pull that off. There are 2 other options if you can't set that, you don't already have that ID in hand. One is the state will make you a free photo ID card to vote. You get that where you get a driver's license. People do need to know that if they remember going to their county courthouse, things have changed. You use drive.ky.gov to find the nearest place set up by the transportation cabinet. They are not horrendously inconvenient. They are not as convenient for most people as it being every county courthouse. The other option is if you flat out can't make anything work, there is an affirmation option at the voting place. You can go to vote and fill out a form that explains why you can't get the ID and showing a lesser form of ID, and there's a list of what's allowed. I won't read that to you because we were reminded by Soraya that time is tight. But that's the thing. So having people know there's an affirmation option. If you know someone who's just doomed and exhausted, tell them to go and say, I want to fill out the form. Here comes the big lift conceptually. There are a lot of ways to vote in person. There are 3 different ways. And I'm going to leave this up for a minute while I talk you through it, because our minds keep trying to make it a step simpler than it is. And what would happen if you simplify too much is you lose an option. Election day is the classic time we're used to voting. We now have 2 options earlier than that. In the dark blue, 3 days of early voting, no excuse, just I want to vote on this day. And that's available to all of us, and that's a nice innovation in Kentucky. Before that, there are 6 days, and those are all business days, when we can vote early if we have the right kind of excuse. And on top of those 3 options, there's also still mail-in voting. I'm going to walk you through those a little more slowly, but the basics of there are 4 is, I think, the framework to not try to make it be any shorter than 4 in becoming a good person at briefing others. For election day voting, the big thing that's different now is the possibility of changed locations. Voting hours are still 6 to 6, but voting locations have changed a bunch around the state, partly because some precinct boundaries have been updated, which has always happened. But we also now have a law allowing precinct consolidation, where voters from multiple precincts share a location and a voting staff, and an increasing number of voting centers in counties that choose to use them, where voters from all precincts can walk in and vote in the same place or several places. My county definitely did that. To find out where those locations are, I would heartily recommend not assuming you know. So either ask your county clerk or go to elect.ky.gov, which has a nice bright button that says find your polling place. And that'll really give you all the options for all the kinds of in-person voting. But to know, don't assume you know where you're voting is the most important thing if you want to vote on election day. Check it out and find out so you're not driving around the county to sort things out. Early voting is the new option. This is early voting that does not require any kind of excuse. You do it because you want to. That will be on the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before election day. The times will vary a little bit by county. It'll be at least 8 hours between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. each day, and the County Board of Elections decides the exact hours. The place will be either your county clerk's office or a place chosen by your County Board of Elections. And to thread through, the time isn't quite settled and the location isn't quite known, either ask your county clerk or use elect.ky.gov. This is a little bit if you got to go do some research to check on exactly where. Lots of county clerks are doing a good job making that information come to you. But I would say for every voter, think I need to know quite where and quite when if I want to vote early. Early voting with excuse. This is earlier. This is going to be 6 business days before the early voting. It'll be normal business hours. It'll be your county clerk's office, or your County Board of Elections could choose another location. And the way you check out what that is again, the beloved elect.ky.gov. My computer goes there if I type the letter E now. Crucial thing to know is who can vote with this option. What are the excuses that count? The big one, I think, is having an age, disability, or illness that prevents later voting. If you're living out of the state temporarily, or if you're living out of the county as a student. If you're working or commuting during voting hours. If you have a scheduled surgery or hospitalization for yourself or your spouse. Pause to note, marriage equality matters. Partnership doesn't get you this right to have excused early voting. Marriage does. Pregnancy in the last trimester, working as an election officer, military or overseas voters, or a uniformed service voter confined to base. I don't know quite why that's different from military or overseas, but I didn't want to edit out any words that seemed to matter in how the law was worded. So you have that option with multiple possibilities. Finally, vote by mail, I hope is familiar to a lot of people. We have a routine schedule for this, but we have a little bit of change in the process. So you have a date when you can start saying, I want a mail-in ballot at govotky.com. For this year, you'll be able to start on September 24th and you'll have till October 25th at 11:59. So you got a big block of time to go in and say, I want this kind of a ballot. And then the schedule is that ballot needs to reach your county clerk's office by 6 p.m., whether you're taking it to a drop box or you're mailing it. And that is a great annoyance. Cindy asked me the sharp, correct question when she saw this. Would it work to have it postmarked by 6 p.m.? And the answer is no, it's got to actually be at the clerk's office to be counted.
Wow.
Minor note, if you have a medical emergency pop up, or you have a friend who has a medical emergency pop up, or your spouse does, on that basis, after October 25th, you can ask for a mail-in ballot on an emergency basis. It's not easy, but if you know someone who's in that situation and it makes them crazy that they're not going to be able to get the voting place, letting them know there is an emergency option, I think, can be helpful. For voting by mail, the excuse list is similar but not identical to the excused in person. It's got the age, disability, and illness, out of state temporarily, out of county as a student temporarily, out of county for all hours of in-person voting. A fairly nice thing about this is it doesn't say for your job. So if what you're doing is you're taking care of a sick friend at the other end of the state, they're not asking what the reason is. It's just true that you need to be out of county. If you're in jail but haven't been convicted, that's a nice small group of people that I hadn't thought about before who have not been convicted of a crime whose rights should not have been taken. They are allowed to use vote by mail. The Crime Victims Confidentiality Program, and again, this is an option for military and overseas voters. That's not a very generous list, but they improved it. They made it more open to the kinds of things that happen in people's lives in changing the law. To vote by mail, the process is not horrendous, but it is a little trickier than is comfortable. So you use govotky.com to ask for the ballot and to provide personally identifiable information for verification. So that's a version of photo ID. When the ballot arrives, you want to complete it carefully, use the 2 envelopes. And I will say, I have seen people online going crazy because they didn't notice there were 2 envelopes. When they opened the envelope, it came in. So I'm saying 2 envelopes to help people be alert to protect their rights. You return it by mail or to a county drop box. It needs to get there by 6 p.m. You can now track the ballot. There are barcodes on the ballots when you send them back. So you can see when it's moving through the postal system and you can see when the county clerk receives it, which I think is a nice, secure thing. We do now have a rule. If there's something wrong with how you signed the ballot, you can go in and cure it. So if you're voting by a mail-in ballot, have it in mind that you're watching your mail pretty closely for an alert that there might be an issue. Just to round this back up, the 5 questions, this was all designed to help people think about is your voter registration up to date? Which photo ID are you going to use? Which of the 4 options for voting are you going to use? Do you know where to vote? And always, always, can you pass this information on? And for these purposes especially, how can the League of Women Voters help you pass the information on? That's the full presentation. I would love it if there are questions, but I haven't been able to see the chat. I'll put it on your screen.
There are actually, there is a question from Wita, a question from Cindy, and a question from Patty Knappel.
Okay.
So if you could go in that order, Wita, Cindy, Patty.
So my question, Susan, where do you ask for an emergency ballot if you have a last minute issue?
I don't know the answer to that. I am halfway confident it's you ask the county clerk, but I do not know. So that is a good one. And I should get that into the notes.
And I was just going to ask, I know that it was part of the Secretary of State's legislation to provide funding and a requirement for the Secretary of State's office to post polling place information. And, you know, right now it's been up to the counties. It's been a mess. It's, you know, like not uniformly posted. And even though counties send that information to the Secretary of State, that doesn't get posted on the Secretary of State's website. So
it was
did
there.
that go through?
It was there. It was actually done for at least the last 3 weeks before the last election. Right. You could actually go and see at govoteky.com, use find your polling location. And it was set up and it was a pretty tidy showing all the options for voting and the locations for each one and the times for each one. So yeah, it went through and it got done.
Okay, good. I checked and I think maybe I did check at the last minute and then it was up. I was hoping for a clickable map, but list is at least something.
Patty Knappel, you're next.
I think Harriet may have answered it. And I noticed your calendar showed there were some early days with excuse where you could do in person. And my question was, do you just show up and give them your excuse, or do you have some process to go through first?
You show up and give it to them, and that would classically be the county clerk's office. But I'd also check elect.ky.gov for find your polling place, in case they've got it far enough away from the county clerk's office that you would really rather go directly there.
Got it. Thanks.
This is a great topic. I'm going to try to keep us as close to time as we can. Just remember that all of these documents are available to you two ways, either in the email I sent this morning or via the link that's embedded in that email. Someone had asked, can we share these? And I think the answer would be yes, 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 please do.
Yes, 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 please do. There's a document version that'll let you see all the notes, but my plan is as soon as someone says, I want to do this, we'll do a little talking just to give you an extra chance to think about questions. But this is set up on Google Drive so I can share it with anybody who wants to be doing presentations as a careful, thoughtful league person with good information.
Thank you, Susan. This was fantastic. Just great information. I'd like to move us along, and another really great topic I know people are going to be interested in related to voting. And I'll turn it over to Wida, Jen, and Felicia.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. There's a lot of great voting information that we're trying to condense into a very small portion, but we've got your back. Vote 411, if you don't know already, which hopefully you do, is the League of Women Voters, National League of Women Voters online voting guide. And that includes not only information from candidates, but also all the questions you have about where to get emergency ballots, where do I go, how do I vote, all the stuff. And so I am going to turn it over to, oh, wait a minute. Oh, sorry. It was a little confusing because like the words were not there. Sorry. So anyway, you know, empowering voters is the mission of the League of Women Voters. This is what we've done for 100 years, right? And so now we are in the 21st century and we can do it by getting online. That's where voters are. They're on their phones. And so, you know, giving people a quick website, vote411.org, they can get the information that they need. They may feel intimidated by going to like government websites and whatnot. So, so we have all the links that Susan mentioned in her site on Vote 411. So, you know, Vote 411 is sort of like a kickback to like, you know, when you dial a telephone and try to get information service, some of you might remember that, but anyway, so this is also where we're asking candidates to share information. We are nonpartisan. We don't edit their information. We just send them out questionnaires. We carefully choose questions to allow them to share their platforms. And then we put that information in Vote 411. And so I am going to, and we need lots of help with this, but I'm going to turn it over to Wida to share you more information about Vote 411.
Great. Thanks, Jen. And they've also made Vote 411 very mobile friendly. So it will work well on a phone or a tablet too. So Vote 411 is the current iteration of the League of Women Voters' long-standing tradition of getting information to. Soraya, please don't put it on automatic advance. I'll let you know when we need to go to next. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. One more back. There we are. Thank you. It's the longstanding tradition of getting information to voters that they need to make well-informed decisions and choices. In its current iteration, it's a piece of software rather than giant stacks of paper for distribution. We put in some information. Candidates are invited to respond to carefully worded questions. We send them and supply additional information. All of that goes into a voter guide that's essentially an online search tool with some geographic specificity. So voters can search for Kentucky candidates using their specific address or browse statewide, and the site contains additional critical information for Kentucky voting in general. Next. So it really has been literally an investment in democracy. Vote 411 is free for voters to use and of course is powered by our volunteer time, but it's not free to operate. So your Kentucky leagues have made a significant investment to meet these costs. The state has contributed $2,500 and the League in Northern Kentucky, the Lexington League and Northern Kentucky leagues have contributed $300 and $200 respectively to cover their own local races. And together that's allowed us to cover all of the state races, plus some local races in 5 counties. If you want to add your county or your league, we'd love to talk with you about doing that. And there's the cost for most counties or leagues, $200 to $300. It's possible that some of the new grant funds may be able to assist with that. I think that's to be determined. Next.
Rita, can I intervene and say, because we just got word that we got that national grant, if there's any locality that wants to join Vote 411, we can use money from that grant to pay for the cost. So that the cost should not prohibit anybody from joining.
That's a thrill. That's a thrill. And in fact, there's only $2,000 more to go before we have permission to cover every race all across the state in every location. So that's great, great news. Thank you, Fran. So who has been using Vote 411? Oh, wait, sorry, you got to back up a couple. Okay, never mind, my mistake. Go ahead. Thank you, thank you. Who's been using Vote 411 so far? We put in the races I just described in for the primary. And during the primary up through primary election day, we had people in 170 towns throughout Kentucky, over 10,000 people. That's not just individual hits or sessions, that's 10,000, over 10,000 people, new users, use Vote 411. And there you can see sort of the dot sizes, Lexington, Louisville, big concentration of overlapping towns in Northern Kentucky, but good distributions elsewhere too. So we fully expect us all to make these dots bigger for the general election. Okay, next. So these are the what's already in the system, what can be added. Next, we've covered all of the US and state legislators, all of the state justice offices, and local officials for 5 counties. Next. To hone in on the local officials, this last week, June 7th, was the filing deadline in most counties for local offices. And those are going to be posted by the middle of next week. So there's a big chunk of new data for the rest of the local offices that is coming available that we can get in. The questions were mentioned. We really think that all the folks have helped contribute to good question writing. So we've got a good base of streamlined process and good questions to help you out when we're as you add these. Next. So the theme of this annual meeting is defending democracy. Here are some ways that you on your own can use Vote 411 or other tools at your disposal to help defend democracy. So first, check and see if candidates in your area have answered their questions. If you ask them in person or by email to respond, that's a more direct ask than what we're able to do by harassing them with repeated emails. So that helps a lot. Next, publicize Vote 411 as a valued and trusted information source to your fellow voters. And third, ask people, are you registered to vote at your current address? Many people move, situations change. Updates with a renewed driver's license sometimes won't have gone through. That happened a lot at the beginning of COVID. I saw lots of people turned away last election at the polls because of this. So many people think they are, but are not actually up to date with their registration. As Susan said, send them to govotky.com. It's what the state provides to check on voter registration updates or register for the first time, all online, and polling places and candidate filings, lots and lots of information. It's direct, and if you go to vote411.org, it will also push you to govotky.com because that's the authoritative source for the state. Next. Here's a reason why it's important. This is a 2016 election year. Green is US voters, yellow is Kentucky voters. If you look from 12 o'clock to about 5 o'clock on these pie charts, the biggest chunk of people were folks who were eligible to vote, but did not vote. About 40% nationally, 41% for Kentucky voters. So that was 1.3 million eligible Kentuckians did not vote, and less than 2 million Kentuckians actually voted. So that is a fundamental way that you can help defend democracy, just registering people and then helping push them, especially the youngsters, to the polls. Okay, next. We would love for you to work with us on Vote 411. There's so much that you can do. First, we'd love to have more local races. It takes some effort, and the league is now providing the funding. That's so fabulous. So we can get your county added. We've got it streamlined. Becky Jones was able to get her 3 counties in Northern Kentucky for that league up and running in less than a week. It was amazing. Anyone can help with user testing in Vote 411, checking information to see what needs updating, for corrections, see if things are as maximally helpful as possible. There are small and large jobs available for any of these things. We'd love for you to help, and please email us at vote411@lwvky.org, and that way you can get to the Vote 411 team, or you can contact some folks directly, and there's information about how to do that in Outreach Circle. So we'd love to hear from you, understand what you'd like to do, and how we can help you defend democracy for Kentucky. Thank you so much. Jen?
I see some of you folks bringing your phones to scan that QR code. That's fantastic. Jen, Rita, I don't know if we're ready to go to Felicia yet, but I thought I might give everyone just a few seconds here to scan that code if they wanted.
Sure. And I'll check on questions in the chat. If you have any other questions, stick them in the chat and I'll answer them. Jen is going to be speaking next.
And Rita, I did see a question about how do they get funding. My suggestion was to be sure and ask you and Fran, because I know you'll give them lots of support, and then that just helps us kind of know who's asking and make sure that you get the support you need.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, in the interest of time, I hope everyone was able to scan the QR code. If not, remember, these slides are available in the documents that were sent or going through the link for Google.
All right, so I'm Jen Jackson. I am the state chair of voter services, but I'm also co-president of the League of Women Voters of Lexington. And so sort of like in that capacity, I wanted to share with you some of the successes that we had in Lexington with empowering voters using Vote 411 this year. Next slide, please. So in our primary election, we kind of switched things up a little bit. You know, historically, we had one team working on candidate forums and one team working on Vote 411. And this year, we really tried to merge them together to, one, conserve resources, and two, double our impact. And so another thing that we tweaked a little bit was our candidate messaging. So our historical letter going out to candidates was kind of like, oh, come do this thing that we're offering to you. And this year we sort of changed it and added a little sales pitch and like, we want to help you get your message out to voters. This is what we are doing for you. This is how you benefit. And so really highlighting the candidate benefits for participating. So cross promotion, every time we had a touch with a candidate, whether it was on the phone, in email, in a letter, if we were talking about, if our primary purpose was to get them to respond to our or to participate in our candidate forums, we were also talking about Vote 411. If our primary purpose was to get them to answer a Vote 411 thing, we were also talking to them about candidate forums. So basically, one volunteer call served two purposes. So in that way, we were able to really double our interactions and reinforce. So they kept hearing it over and over from us, like basically candidate forums and Vote 411 were hand in hand. And another thing that we really worked on was crowdsourcing. So if voters didn't, you know, a lot of the complaints that we get are voters go to Vote 411 and there's not information from their candidates. So we're like, hey, if you don't see information for the candidate that you're interested in, reach out to them. Tell them to participate in Vote 411 because it's a lot stronger of a message coming from voters than necessarily coming from our organization. So the more voters that are saying, hey, you really should, you know, whipping up the buzz about participating in Vote 411, the more candidates you get participating. And this year, something different happened. We had candidates contacting us and saying, hey, how do I get my link for Vote 411? Because they had heard about it from other people, knew other candidates were participating in it. So they came knocking on our door for information, which was definitely encouraging for us. Next slide, please. So highlights, we had an 80% increase in our views over 2018 using Vote 411 and more than 2,300 new users, which you might be like, well, that's not a ton. But when you look at only 19% voter turnout for the state of the city of Lexington, you know, that's really only 42,000 voters. And this was just a primary election. So, and now that we've kind of got this buzz and we've gotten so much positive feedback, we're going to use that to kind of ride a wave of success into the fall election. Also want to note that we had half of our candidates respond and put in information, which, you know, also sounds like, well, that's only half, but most of the time we only get a third of people participating. And an unofficial observation was that I noticed that if there was an election where there were candidates that added information and ones that did not, maybe it was just coincidence, but it seemed like that the people that put information were the candidates that ended up winning their race. So, you know, I think it goes to speak that voters like to see information. And when they don't have any information, they're just like, well, I have a name versus somebody who shared their platform. And I'm a little bit more comfortable like knowing what that person is about. And that's what we want to do. We just want to give voters information so they can make whatever decision that they want to make. Next slide. So I just wanted to share this feedback. I know it's kind of long, but how awesome is it that some person in our community wrote this really long email thanking us about what we did. And the key highlights are that they wanted to thank us for all the time and effort that they had found that there is not enough meaningful information in the community about candidates in the primaries, and particularly those down ballot races that nobody's paying attention to. Constable, people don't know what it is. And they certainly, you know, those are not like the big races that other organizations are paying attention to. They went on to say that the League of Women Voters is consistently great. The questionnaires are thoughtful and explanatory, and that we share our process with transparency without preference or favoritism. So, you know, this is what gets me excited about participating with the League of Women Voters. And so I want to also, you know, let you all know we have a great reputation in our community, and we can continue to share this with other people. So next slide. I want to go ahead and introduce you to Becky Jones. She is the president of our state administered league of Northern Kentucky.
Well, thank you very much, Jen. And I just wanted to take a minute or two to let you know that the league in Northern Kentucky did participate with Vote 411 by getting the primary candidates up on the site. And we didn't have quite the response from candidates that they did in Lexington because it's sort of new to our area. But one thing I will reiterate is that Jen's comment about telling the candidates that this is a way to help them get their message out worked. There is a feature where a letter goes out to the candidates saying, you're up on this Vote 411. We invite you to answer this questionnaire. And then there's a follow-up letter if they don't respond immediately. And in that follow-up letter, I used sort of that goading information that your competitor has already put something up on Vote 411 and would really love for you to share your message with the public as well. And that did encourage a few more people to answer those questionnaires and return them. So that's very beneficial to let candidates know that this is a service. We're nonpartisan, and we're not promoting one candidate over another, but if they want to get their message out to the most people, this is a great way to do it. A shout out too to people who have participated in helping write those candidate questions. There are generally, I would say 5 to 6 questions that candidates have to answer or they're asked to answer. It's not an onerous task for them. And what I observed from the candidate responses were that they are very thoughtful in their responses to those questions. So they're not questions that are tricks or gotchas or trying to promote one position over another. The second thing would be volunteers to expand the effort. And I know one of those QR codes provided a link to volunteer to help expand the effort. I found the process, this is honesty, full honesty, I found the process very intimidating. And I'll have to say that I got through it only because Rita is a saint, and she has taken on a Herculean effort to get statewide races loaded in. So what we're doing locally is just beefing up all those down ballot races with the local stuff, which is what tends to get overlooked and people really want. So through Rita's help, we were able to do that in Northern Kentucky, but we could use more volunteers. And once you learn the process of how to work the system, I liken it to, you know, I come at this as somebody who I know how to drive a car, but I can't tear apart my engine and put it back together. You don't have to know how to be a mechanic to help with Vote 411. So just keep that in mind. It might seem intimidating at first, but my message is if I can do it, I'm pretty sure you can do it.
Thank you so much. I am going to, Felicia is next, but I am going to do just a quick time check because I've actually been so engaged in listening that I forgot. So yeah, we're pretty much on time. We'll have a 15-minute break after this. I'm really looking forward actually to Felicia's presentation and her video. So Felicia, you are on.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. I'd like to introduce a voting video series made specifically for high school students called Why Your Vote Counts. This was done by the High School Voter Services Committee of Louisville. And first of all, I want to thank Margie and all the members of the committee who supported this. I know one member of the committee is here today. This started because we couldn't get into high schools. We have nearly 20 public high schools in Jefferson County and nearly the same number of private high schools. And because of restrictions, COVID restrictions, we couldn't get in year and a half, 2 years ago. And we had been looking anyway for a way to reach out to more high schools because we can't possibly visit all of them unless we had more volunteers. So we came up with the idea of a YouTube video, which we could share with teachers, counselors, administrators, and so on, which they could show to the kids, at least to get them started. The way this started was that a subcommittee was formed. The lead of that subcommittee happened to be the director of REACH, R-E-A-C-H, at University of Louisville. REACH is, let me see if I have the name for it, Resources for Academic Achievement at the University of Louisville. And mainly, that department concentrates on freshmen to help them get started academically. So they were focusing anyway on the same age group. Okay, more or less the same age group. So the subcommittee decided on the question and answer format. They decided they want a student to question a political science professor at the University of Louisville. He graciously offered us his office and his time. The student we already knew, Kristen, and Kristen was already very interested in civic engagement. She still is, and we keep her updated on how this goes. So the subcommittee decided on 9 short videos focusing on 9 simple questions about voting, which a new voter might ask. And let me see what else I wanted to tell you about it. Some are as short as 2.5 minutes, some are as long as 9 minutes. And the outreach so far has Education Department of Fraser Museum has accepted it and will be using it. The Louisville Urban League just recently in the last week accepted it, and their guild is possibly going to use it. And of course, it is on Outreach Circle. And right now I want to thank Jen Jackson for converting our link, our YouTube link, into a QR code. Can I see the next slide, please?
Yes.
Oh, okay, it's going to start. Okay, but there is a QR code for it. And we decided on this 6-minute video, which is what if you don't like either candidate? So thank you, okay, and please enjoy.
Sorry, I think you muted it.
I think it's muted.
Oh, is it? Not. No, it was working. I let me check and make sure.
We heard it at first and then it got muted. So if you mute yourself and then it'll mute your screen too. But I don't think it's playing right now.
Soraya, you've muted yourself. Maybe that is why we can't hear it.
So in many ways, what I do is I will pick, first off, I'll start off in primary so that I can try to get the candidate that I like the most. You're more likely to have primary, you are voting.
Has someone started the video? Because I was hearing it begin again.
No.
Okay, I'll
The
continue.
election that determines the party's candidate. And so if you are voting in a partisan election, then you share that party ID, well, at least in Kentucky, depends on what state you're in. But and so then what you'll get is you'll get a slate and a range of candidates that go maybe from the most liberal to the more moderate, and on the other side from the most conservative to the more moderate. And that primary you'll get to pick. And so then that will minimize, the more you turn out, people turn out for that, that'll minimize the chances of having a general election with two candidates that you don't like. Right. So that's the first part of the strategy. Oftentimes, if you are not in line with the majority of the partisans in your district, then or region, then that won't necessarily work. And what I do when I get to the general election is because I'm strategic. I'm willing to vote for candidates that I don't completely like if I like them more than the other candidate. In those instances where that is just not the case either way, there usually are some third-party candidates on the ballot, or you can write one in, and so you can make the principled vote just for your own mental well-being, that you don't want to vote for somebody you don't like, even though you'll lose that way. And if we come up to the point of I don't know if a question will come up about why there are only two parties, or why there's a reason for that too. And I'll leave that for later if it comes up then.
On a move.
Wow, those were great.
Thank you.
They're really, in my opinion, very well done. Thank you so much. This link is in the presentation. But Felicia, I remembered you sent us a link, and maybe I'll include it in the follow-up email, where we could see all of the videos that were done. Some of them are longer than others.
Absolutely.
So
I'll send you that link.
And if you could put it in chat too, that would be really great. But I'll send it out in the follow-up email too.
Thank you. I just want to say, if anyone has a question about it, or wants me to send them to a particular email, those links, I will do that.
And I'll just say that the QR code to see all of those was in the slide after the video slide.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, I think because the rest of my presentation is.
Okay, we do have speakers scheduled for 12:10, and we didn't get our 15-minute break. So I think we might have to wait on our break or take it quickly. Do we have our speakers, Trey and Jim on?
This is Jim, I'm on.
Great. Do we have Trey? Not yet.
So Roy, let's give Trey about 3 minutes.
I'm on.
Oh, okay, we've
Perfect,
got,
perfect.
well, then what we may do is welcome, I'm gonna make a quick introduction here. As far as the lunch break goes, everybody, I think what we're going to do is munch while our speakers speak. We've got Jim, and then we can get Trey. So we've got him too. And let me just make a few introductory remarks here, and we'll just move ahead so we can stay on schedule. I want to, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, former Secretary of State Trey Grayson and former State Representative Jim Wayne. Both are longtime friends of the League, and I don't want to take up a lot of time introducing them so that we can get right to their comments. Trey Grayson, originally from Northern Kentucky, is a Republican who was twice elected Kentucky's Secretary of State. He then went on to become director of the Harvard Institute of Politics. Currently, he's an attorney with Frost, Brown, Todd, and serves as a principal for Civic Point, the firm's public affairs affiliate. Jim Wayne is a Democrat from Louisville who served in the Kentucky House of Representatives for 29 years, from 1990 till 2019. Jim is a psychotherapist, which I think must have come in very handy when he was in the House. In fact, Bellarmine University has named their training program in psychotherapy the Wayne Institute. He's also an author. His novel, The Unfinished Man, was very well received. So welcome to you both. We have suggested that you share your thoughts with us concerning Kentucky's political landscape and what ought to be the League's role in defending democracy. But please feel free to tell us whatever you think is important for us to know in our work in the year to come. Trey, if we could begin with you for about 15 minutes, and then Jim for the same amount of time, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. So we'll start with you, Trey.
Thanks, Fran, and good to see everybody. I'm in South Carolina right now, hence the sort of yellow backdrop and more casual attire than my fancy psychotherapist, recovering politician colleague, Wayne. It's good to see all of you. I gambled. It's an overcast day today, so I don't feel guilty about doing this while my family's at the beach and not getting any sun. I'm enjoying some time with some friends from Kentucky. So it's good to be with all of you. I thought I'd wanted to hit on a couple of things to during the time we've got together before we hit the Q&A. One thing that has changed since when I was elected for the first time in 2003, and when Jim was elected earlier than that, as at least looking at the state level, Kentucky has gone from we didn't call it blue state back then. It was a Democratic state. And now it's a fairly Republican state. I mean, obviously there's pockets of strong Democratic support, but if you're looking at the state legislature, the numbers are overwhelmingly Republican and not likely to change anytime soon. In fact, after this election, if anything, they might head slightly more Republican than Democratic. And so if you're, when you're trying to change state level policy, you got to start with some things that you can control and some things you can't control. And then, so I think that that Republican nature of the legislature is something that's, it's just, you got to treat it as a bit of a given. And so when the League's trying to figure out its strategies on policies you want to advance and people and allies you want to secure, you have to acknowledge that, and you have to work to build those allies from, recognizing that. When I look at the Republican Party today, I had an interesting conversation a couple months ago with one of the legislative leaders, and he was just talking about his approach to sort of leading the party. He said, in his mind, there's 3 factions in the Kentucky Republican Party, which I thought this was kind of an interesting way to think about Republicans and how you might want to tackle public policy. One is he calls it, and these terms don't necessarily mean anything. These are more descriptive. There's not like an official name of these factions or these groups. But one is, I would just use the term, traditional Republicans, establishment Republicans, more Chamber of Commerce type Republicans. A good example of somebody like that would be Julie Radke Adams in Louisville. I would fall into this category. The folks who are probably in more of the urban and suburban areas in the Republican Party legislative caucus, although not exclusively, fall into this category. And the state Chamber of Commerce, they tend to push a lot of their agenda items and things like that. So that's an important faction, and that's probably the faction where you're most likely to find your allies, or at least start with that faction. The second faction is more of the social conservatives. I mean, one of the things that's been really striking over the last couple of legislative cycle or election cycles is the number of pastors that have been elected to the state legislature. Some of this is the nature of a part-time legislative body. If you are a state legislator, most folks still have to have another job to make ends meet, unless they're retired or they have a job that's fairly they have to have a job that's fairly flexible. And so a lot of these, a pastor, especially in some of the more rural areas of Kentucky, is not quite a full-time job. And there is still this tradition in Kentucky to not do a whole lot of campaigning on Sundays. And so they can do, they're pastoring on Sundays and wrap it around during the week. And pastors also bounce around from church to church, again, in the rural areas, and then tend to know a lot of people. They tend to be good at interaction with people, tend to be charismatic speakers and figures. And so, but there's a fair number of pastors in the legislature to combine with some of the folks who've been more traditionally socially conservative. And then the third faction, which is sort of rising up, and it got a lot of headlines after the primary election, are what they call Liberty Republicans. I prefer to call them Libertarian Republicans, because some of them actually were registered libertarians and joined the party because they recognize that in Kentucky's current structure with closed party primaries, it's really hard for third party candidates to make a difference. Or to win. They can make a difference, but it's usually, it often splits the vote from somebody who might be more ideologically similar to them. And so those Libertarian Republicans, there in the current legislature, there are only a handful of those that you would say, okay, these are definitely in that category. But they do influence public policy, and they're going to be a bigger force in the next General Assembly. There are 4 open seats that Republicans are going to win, where it'll be one of these Libertarian Republicans take over. And then you probably all saw the news of the 3 incumbent Northern Kentucky state representatives that lost re-election, and they all lost to these Libertarian Republicans. Maybe during Q&A we can talk a little bit more about the Northern Kentucky races and the Northern Kentucky dynamic. But that's going to be 7 new faces in the House. And that's so then plus people who may have some sympathies who may fall into some of these other categories. So that means they're going to be more influential inside the party. So those are sort of, I think an important way to think about the legislature. It also, when you look at the governor's race, there's a bunch of people running. One thing in Kentucky is we may put some barriers in certain ways in our elections, in the sense of it's hard for independents and third-party candidates to succeed, and our primaries are closed. But if you want to run for office, it's actually fairly easy in Kentucky. We don't have large signature gathering requirements, as long as you're a member of a political party. But if you want to run statewide, it's 2 signatures and $500. And those 2 signatures, and a notary, and those 2 signatures could be, your spouse and your kid. So somebody could wake up one day, I'm bored, I think I'm going to run around the state, and for $500, and you get 2 people to sign your papers, you're now a candidate, which means you get invited to a whole lot of chicken dinners, or you can complain about not getting invited to those chicken dinners. We saw this, for example, in the U.S. Senate primary this year with everybody knew that former Representative Charles Booker was going to be the Democratic nominee, and current Senator Rand Paul was going to be the Republican, but there were lots of people in those races who took advantage of the easy ballot access rules. So we're likely to see a whole lot of people run, and it wouldn't shock me if somebody primaried Governor Beshear. They wouldn't have a chance, but again, 2 signatures, $500, why not? But on the Republican side, there are a fair number of candidates who you can see sort of occupying these lanes or trying to put together coalitions to get to a plurality, because that's all you need since we got rid of the runoff 10 plus years ago. So, Daniel Cameron, who's the current Attorney General, Mike Harmon, the current State Auditor, Ryan Quarles, the current Commissioner of Agriculture, Savannah Maddox, who's in one of those Libertarian Republicans, just announced this past week. Former UN Ambassador Kelly Craft a couple weeks ago was telling people that she was planning to run, but since she started doing that, there hasn't been any public indication that she's going to run. But until I hear otherwise, I would think of her as a candidate. Suspended attorney Eric Dieters from Northern Kentucky, who's kind of got a little bit of following, at least in our area of the state. He's in the race. And there may be some others. Current Somerset Mayor Alan Keck has talked about running, but is apparently going to take a little bit of a pause. State Senator Ralph Alvarado, who chairs the Health Committee, who was Matt Bevin's running mate 3 years ago, has talked about running, as current State Senator Max Wise. My guess is that not of those last three, that we won't see all three of those enter. Maybe none of those three would enter. And then the wild card, of course, is Matt Bevin, who actually has been making a few phone calls. He's not been very visible around the state publicly, either in political gatherings, community gatherings, that sort of thing. He uses social media accounts every once in a while, but he has independent wealth, he has name ID, and he probably has a certain percentage of the vote, despite the way he left office under with some of those. So it could be a really crowded field, and it'll be interesting to see how, Maddox is obviously trying to play that libertarian lane. There's no pure social conservative. I guess Harmon is a social conservative. You had to slot him. And then the others were probably trying to appeal to a little bit of everybody. So we'll see how that plays out. I think from my perspective, until I see who the nominee is, it's hard to assess Governor Beshear's chances, other than to say, of course, he can be reelected. He's probably got to be considered the slight favorite until you see how the primary plays out, given some of the polling data. After all, he was hired by the electorate. And even if he was hired because he was who he's running against, nonetheless, he was hired. And so while the population shifts a little bit and no electorate is exactly the same, you're going to have some people, there's likely going to have to be some people who voted for him 4 years ago who don't vote for him this time. And thus fire. And we see states that have governors from the minority party get reelected, even if they're elected under some unique circumstances. Louisiana currently has a Democratic governor, and like Kentucky, it's gone from more Democratic control to Republican control. But Governor Edwards has been was reelected. And up in Massachusetts and in Maryland, we've seen Republican governors win states that are pretty blue. I think both states are going to revert to norm and elect Democrats this year. But in Massachusetts, we've seen a long run. Over the last 32 years, I think only eight years have been Democratic governors. So Governor Beshear can certainly get reelected. Maybe my last couple minutes, I'll just focus a little bit more on the league, and then I'm excited about the questions you all have. I mean, I think that given the reality of the Republican dominance of legislators. Oh, and actually one other thing I want to say is, it is clear that when the legislature is in power, that no matter who the governor is, even if a Republican becomes governor, that the General Assembly recognizes the awesome powers that they have to pass legislation and then override a veto with a constitutional majority, which in most cases means the exact same vote that they had to pass the bill in the first place. So the legislature is setting public policy in this state. I don't anticipate that changing too much if there's a Republican governor. After all, we saw them not get along with Governor Bevin, quite often when he was governor. So that's just something to keep in mind, that there are things that the legislature is in ascendancy. They're the only ones that can pass a constitutional amendment. The governor doesn't play a role in that. And so things like felony voting or some of the other reforms that the league focuses on, I think you got to identify those champions. Focus on some of the relevant committee chairs. Kevin Bratcher's probably not going anywhere as the House Elections Chair for a while. Robbie Mills, if he, the one wild card about all this is because of the elections, committee chairs might change, and so it may be hard to develop a lot of strategy right now. But nonetheless, I think you still got to go with who the committee chairs are. Robbie Mills from Henderson is, in his first go around as state and local chair. That's where a lot of election things start, and so I think building those Republican allies is critically important. And it might mean narrowing your focus. There may be some issues where you build those Republican allies. There may be some where, Republicans, you can find Republican supporters, and that's okay, but you just have to recognize the reality that Obviously, there's a role for an executive order. We saw that with current Governor Bashir and his felony voting executive order. I think one other thing I will note before finishing is that I think with the felony voting, there might be, the Libertarian Republicans might be an interesting place to go talk when you're looking for Republican support. Some of those more libertarian mind or a little bit more freedom mind that might be willing to move a little bit on that issue. You know, I know that Freedom Works has been pretty strong supporter of restoration of felony voting rights and making those permanent. And that's a libertarian group. Now, the challenge is some of these folks on the libertarian side use the term libertarian, but they really just are hard right, really hardcore conservatives. I hate Democrat type conservatives, but the ones that are pure libertarians, those would be interesting allies for a lot of the things that, at least in the felony voting space. So that's something I do feel like there's some opportunity there to make some of what makes some permanent changes there. Although we have, an amendment you can only do every couple of years, so we got a 2-year road to do on that. But that might be an interesting place to look. So I'll stop there. I'm interested to hear what Jim has to say, and I'm excited to hear what questions you have.
Thanks, Trey. Jim, you want to follow up?
Sure. It is an honor to be with all of you, and especially an honor to be with Trey. When he was in office, we shared the same time in office when he was Secretary of State, and I hold great characteristic. If I were to give a main virtue that Trey holds as a person, is civility, and we need that desperately right now in this state and in this nation. And it's good to be with you, Trey. I think in terms of the landscape, Trey took a bit of a microcurrent analysis, which I think is very enlightening. And I don't think I disagree with anything that he said, especially with regard to strategy on connecting with allies in the legislature. And as you members of the league know, in working in the legislature, personal relationships are very important. The other thing that's very important is to recognize the link between personal relationships and where you have membership. So if you have strong membership in certain areas, you have great influence with those legislators in those areas. And so it's very important, if you're going to expand the strength and the platform that you all have shared and built, it's important to continue to expand membership in the state, especially in the rural areas. And I don't think Trey would disagree, but we have a lot of people in the legislature who are leaders who come from rural areas. And so what happens is we think, well, the pockets in maybe certain areas like Hopkinsville or Lexington or Louisville or even now Northern Kentucky with the league, you say, well, I want to connect with a mountain legislator who's in leadership. It's very important that you recognize you don't have as much influence with that legislator as you might have with some in the areas where you have strong membership. So going to Clay County and enlisting a group of people in Clay County would help you with President Stivers. Those kind of obvious connections may not be something that's on your radar screen, but it might be something strategically you want to think about. Now, in terms of a more macro level, I think we are in difficult times right now, not just in Kentucky, but in the nation and the world. But I think it's so important that the reasonable civil voice of the league be heard. And as you got smacked a bit by my former colleague, Bob Hellrider, this past year when you promoted the idea of setting up an independent commission for redistricting, some people, when you start increasing your influence, are going to smack you down and label you simplistically like Bob did. And typically Bob's a little bit more reasonable, but in the case of redistricting, he fell back to the same old style that the Democrats used when they were in power on redistricting. And that is basically to do it behind closed doors, have a small elite carve up the state.
Jim, we've lost your audio.
Way to do the redistricting. The other thing I would encourage you to keep in mind is, because we live in such difficult times, because we have the gun violence, because we have inflation, because we have the destruction of the environment, and we have now the threat of nuclear war hanging over our heads any minute with the proxy war that's going on in Ukraine, people are scared. People are very, very scared. And when people are scared, reason is dismissed pretty quickly. And so it's very important for you all to remain reasonable. And I caught a glimpse of some of the programs you all have been developing and are working on. It's so important that you stay focused on some of these very reasonable plans and programs that you have. Because what we're seeing statewide is the fear is pushing people to simplistic answers for immediate relief. And former President Trump really understood that dynamic. And he basically used it to get elected. And he continues to use it today to try to frighten people or play on their fears, to give simplistic answers and to distort reality. So we have to keep in mind, when you're trying to address the voters, that one of the things you want to continue to realize is try to help them understand that a more reasonable, open government is something that actually is for their own good. In the state, the Libertarian group, or the Liberty group, as Trey was talking about, they really are extremists when it comes to understanding the balance between individual liberties and what we would term the common good. And in the past, especially from the World War II period, post-World War II period, up until maybe the era that ended about 10 years ago, we did have a number of people, and Trey alluded to this when he talked about mainstream Republicans, or I think he called himself a Chamber of Commerce Republican. They were able to compromise. They were able to look at the common good and reach consensus with the opposing party. And people recall the relationship that John Kennedy had with John Sherman Cooper. And the fact that in the past, we know that legislators can get along and we don't demonize one another, and we don't have ad hominem attacks on one another on the House or Senate floor. Those days are gone right now. And but I don't think that means that we don't try to restore those norms. It's very important for a democracy to function, for the opposing ideas, and opposing parties, and opposing individuals to reach compromise. And that's not happening as much as it should. Instead, we have deadlock government, not only in Washington, but now increasingly it becomes paralyzed in Frankfurt, and certain extremist views can surface pretty quickly to the detriment, I think, of the whole Commonwealth. I think in terms of some of the ideas that might be helpful for the league to consider is understanding the rules of the House and Senate. They've changed a lot, and Trey, I'm sure, is aware of this. They've changed a lot even since I was there. And power has been consolidated in the leadership even more than it was when I was there. For instance, what happens is excuse me, the leadership during my time there set up political action committees. And the leadership then goes out and raises money across the state. That political action committee is controlled by House leaders or Senate leaders. So they then distribute that money to their handpicked allies in their respective chambers. And what happens is Then they consolidate their power. They determine who's going to be committee chairs to control the agenda. And it's very Machiavellian, to be honest about it. And it's also very clandestine. And of course, there's a permission for dark money to flow into the House and Senate races also. So one of the things is to look at is the House rules. And for instance, a 24-hour notice for a bill being posted in a committee. Are we going to have that rule? Are we going to have a rule that if amendment is going to be filed on the House or Senate floor to a bill, are you going to have public notice of that beforehand? Or is it going to be something you can drop in 10 minutes before a vote without public scrutiny? And you see repeatedly how the House and Senate have shifted things and they rush legislation through. It used to take 5 days for a bill to be reviewed, and now they streamline it all. What happens, and the league should be very alert to this, that locks out the public opinion. People cannot get to Frankfurt in time, prepare testimony, and counter arguments on certain amendments or bills. And that's a threat to democracy. That's not representative democracy. That's moving toward dictatorship by the elite in each chamber. I think the other thing to be aware of is the openness of government is being threatened. And you saw that with the open records and open meetings bills that were considered and passed in the last session. And when you read some of the work of Amy Bensenhaver, who used to be in the AG's office, and some of the attorneys that represent the Press Association, you realize that what's happening is, as you control more in government, in the House and Senate, as Trey talked about, because that's a policy-making body when they're in session, you control that by also shutting the people out of discussions, of meetings, of open records and open documents. And that is another threat to democracy, because then you end up again with an elite telling everybody what to do without public input. The other problem we have, and I'm not sure it's going to be a league issue that you can handle by yourself, is going to take probably a federal constitutional amendment, unless a Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court is somehow reversed. And that is that we have so much dark money flowing in to both parties right now. And you saw that with the Greenberg candidacy this past May in the Louisville mayoral race, where an independent PAC was set up and his papa put in $300,000. And, basically that candidate was bought by the wealthy elite in Louisville. And I'm a Democrat, and I'll tell you that. We'll see what his Republican counterpart does this fall. But this is a scandal and a threat to democracy. When you have this much independent money flowing in, you don't always know who the donors are. You look at the record of Rand Paul, and you see this multi-gazillionaire from New Jersey who pours money into his campaign, to the point where Rand Paul can go play golf in Mar-a-Lago and have a golf service send his golf clubs on a private jet down to Mar-a-Lago, and he pays for that with his campaign money. There's something wrong when this is going on, folks. This is not right for democracy. And Rand Paul's not the only one that does that kind of stuff. The other thing I think you really want to look at some point is the Legislative Ethics Commission. It is a toothless tiger. It is a nothing. They don't even have due process. They don't have rules of how you call witnesses or bring evidence. It's a sham, really. And that's not the intention. When that Legislative Ethics Commission was developed back in the early 90s, following the Bobtrot scandal of the FBI, it had some teeth. And over time, the legislators watered it down because they don't want the scrutiny. They don't want to be accountable. And that's being blunt about it, but that's the truth. So when I brought issues before the Legislative Ethics Commission and had really skilled attorneys who pro bono were my allies, they realized what a circus this is. This is a meaningless exercise. So that's something you may want to put on your agenda, is to look at the Legislative Ethics Commission and see if the rules can't be tightened and it can't be more objective. But I think the other thing I really want to encourage you all to continue to do is voter education. People vote with their gut, not with their brains. But we need to keep promoting the idea that they need to use their brains to vote. And that's where you folks, being nonpartisan and trying to stage public events and promote education and promote voting, especially for the younger people, these are wonderful things that really are the foundation for building a better democracy, which today we all know is being threatened by so many different forces. So maybe those are comments that can be helpful to you, and I'm open to discussion.
Thank you, Jim. You gave us a lot to think about there. Both of you appreciate that. I'm going to ask for questions. I did see while people are either putting questions in the chat or raising their hand, and I'll turn it over to Soroya because she's monitoring that. But I did see one question. I'll start for both of you to answer, and then turn it back to Soroya to take questions from chat. One question that I did see, there's going to be a constitutional amendment about the legislature calling itself back into session. And we'd be interested in hearing what you both think of for that constitutional amendment. So Jim, why don't you start with that? And then Trey, I'd be interested in your thoughts too.
Well, my own opinion about that is it's a bad idea. And I'm always cautious about giving the governor too much power because historically Kentucky's governors have had too much power. But I really do think that one person elected by all the people should have an overview of what public policy should be. Not that that person's always right, but when we're in a crisis, that person should be responsible to call us into session for special reasons. It doesn't always have to be a crisis. Could be a certain deadline on federal funds or something. You have to call us in for a special session. But I do not want to give any more power right now to this power elite in Frankfurt that is so isolated, insular, and is not really holding themselves up to public scrutiny. I think it's very dangerous.
Trey, what's your feeling about it?
Sure. Yeah, I think you have to start with, do you want a part-time legislature or not? I think my guess is most Kentuckians do want a part-time legislature. And when if you start from that, and then and I would say I do too. I struggle with this amendment. I think I'm probably going to vote no. I'm sympathetic to. I do think that the current fight between the legislature and the governor has gotten out of hand. But I am sympathetic to the fact that I felt like at the beginning of the pandemic that the governor didn't engage legislative leaders as often as he should have at the beginning, and then it just spiraled, and they have no relationship right now. But that doesn't strike me as a once in a century pandemic. Doesn't strike me as a reason to do this. And as I recall, and to be honest, I haven't paid real close attention to the details of this amendment for a while, but I remember watching it go through, and I felt like it was a little too even open-ended. And so, yeah, so I'm not supportive of it. And annual sessions is, I think, a good balance to empowering the legislature to be involved in the policymaking process at an appropriate amount. I think I'm really glad I voted for that 20 years ago. I'm glad I did. I don't follow the joke that, used to be we would come in every 2 years for 60 days and we better if they came in every 60 years for 2 days. That's one of the jokes you would hear. Jim probably heard that. But I think annual session has done a nice job of enhancing the power of the legislature. But we do, so yeah, I would vote. I'm currently planning to vote no, but like I said, I got to go back and look at it again. But my gut tells me that this is too open-ended and probably too much enhancement of legislative power for a part-time body.
Okay, thanks. Soroya, do we have some questions?
We do have some questions in the chat. I'm going to kind of skip some of the way they came in because Jennifer's asking a question I think that would be a good follow-up to the amendment question. She says she would be interested in hearing your perspectives on the amendments. In the case of the abortion amendment, not so much the pro-life, pro-choice standpoint, but your perspective of making this a constitutional amendment versus legislation.
Trey, you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways of looking at it. I mean, one is just crass politics, right? I mean, I think part of why since we don't have an initiative form of government in Kentucky, we only have amendments. Some of this is, desire to put an amendment on the ballot that, abortion, pro-life issues. I don't know what your all's views, but generally speaking, Kentucky, it's one that does actually cross party lines and support. I mean, Kentucky has a fair number of social conservative Democrats. And so my guess is this anything on abortion is likely going to pass and fire up votes and allow Republicans to say, look at those, liberal DC elite Democrats. So there's a political element to it that I'm sure played a big role in putting it on the ballot. If you are in the same way that abortion rights supporters, supported at least the outcome, if not the reasoning of Roe v. Wade. If you're a pro-life supporter, you'd want to put something like that in the Constitution of Kentucky. And if Roe v. Wade is struck down and returns some or all power on this issue to the states, having an amendment is a way to ensure that something you think is important gets into the Constitution. I will say more generically, one of the things that's been interesting is Kentucky, for many years, we just didn't do a lot of amendments. We did amendments when there were structural changes that were needed, like reforming the courts 50 years ago, allowing annual sessions and succession of the governor and some things like that, term limits, or allowing governors to put, doing all those structural things. We don't legislate at the ballot box. We legislate in the General Assembly. And I do worry a little bit about amendments becoming a way to legislate going forward, even if it's something that I support. I worry about that. I've seen other states use amendments to, for example, there was an amendment proposed in Ohio a couple of years ago to do something I generally support, which was some criminal justice reform, but it was done in a really poor manner. It would have really hamstrung the state, and it would have stuck it in the Constitution. So it was interesting dynamic where you had some criminal justice reform supporters urging a no vote on an amendment that they generally supported the aim and what they were trying to do, and it would create it for some awkward campaigning, and so I think real confusion among voters. And so I hope that we don't get there, and that this is more of a one-off issue because of the uniqueness of abortion.
There's not much that I would disagree with on what Trey said. One thing I want to emphasize that he said was, and this has been my experience also, sometimes constitutional amendments are placed on the ballot strategically, not because the issue was so important, but the issue would drive people to the polls to favor one party over another party. When you lock in a policy issue like this on abortion, I think there's some real risk in that. And it'll immediately be challenged again in the courts. And we have to recognize that when it comes to abortion rights and so these emotional issues that stir up people's fears and cause people to rush to the polls based on their gut rather than their brains, that's not necessarily for the common good. When you blanket a ban on all abortions, you risk women's lives. And by the way, I'm Catholic, and I'm, in terms of abortion, it's an abomination in my point of view. But at the same time, there are certain issues that I think become extreme in terms of the logic or illogic that are attached to them. And abortion is certainly one that can easily fall into that category. For instance, if you have a ectopic pregnancy, okay, you're going to ban that. If a woman has an ectopic pregnancy, you consider that an abortion. And then what happens if the ectopic pregnancy is performed? What do you do with the remains? I mean, we get to these extreme arguments, and it becomes a little bit silly, quite frankly. And common sense goes out the window. So if you lock all that into a constitutional amendment, I think there's some real danger in there.
There are two other comments that I think naturally go together. One is from Becky Jones. Good question. When and why did compromise become a negative? And WIDA asked, I think along the same lines, what tools are available, what strategies are available to citizens or the league to counteract the current circumvention of process and public input in the state legislature?
Well, I'll go first on that. I did touch on that a little bit in terms of circumventing. Compromise, again, goes out the window if you're appealing to an extreme of one point of view or another. And people think, well, in all my self-righteousness, I'm going to promote this point of view, and nothing is going to compromise my point of view. And that in a representative democracy, that doesn't work. I certainly have some deeply held values that I took to the legislature, and I kept pushing those values. But when those values had to be compromised, I recognized, hey, I have to vote for this because there is good in it. It's not the ideal that I'm shooting for, but there's good in it. And that's absolutely essential in a representative democracy. I think the other thing, in terms of circumventing the whole process, when I talked about the way the rules are structured in each chamber, and by the way, as you may know, at the beginning of each organizational session period, which is the beginning of each term, the House and Senate pass a set of rules. And it used to be the set of rules were tweaked a little bit here and there to ease the flow of legislation or make the process simpler. But the rules have been used in recent years to consolidate power and to eliminate public input in large measure. And you know, when you change a rule about a 24-hour notice for a bill going into a committee so the public can be alerted and prepared, same with an amendment on the House floor or whatever, or when you gut a bill, you remember a couple of years ago when they took a sewer bill and they gutted all the language in it and put in a pension reform bill that was not scrutinized. It had no public opinion and testimony before a committee, and they ramrodded it through. You know, that's not good for the Commonwealth and for the common good. So so the rules are very important. And I think if the league could focus on those rules and say, these are good rules that promote transparency and openness and public participation, and these are rotten rules that consolidate power in the leadership. Those are the kind of judgments that can be debated in the league and promote some reasonable rulemaking that is going to actually improve public participation in the process.
So let me try to answer both those briefly. The compromise question, you know, one thing that changed is the state had a lot of local races that were set up in, you know, not set up, but by default were one-party rules, meaning whoever won the primary was going to win the election. A lot of local governments are that way and all throughout Kentucky. But we always had a fair number of competitive races, and that would result in different types of candidates emerging out of primary, or, you know, merging out of primaries, because there's no, in politics, the best lesson is a loss. Like, oh, we don't want to do that again. What was the lesson we learned from that loss? We don't want to nominate somebody like that. And, you know, the times have changed a little bit. I'll give you a good example. So when I was Secretary of State, you know, the state was a kind of a purplish state. You know, we had a mixture of constitutional officers that were Republican and Democratic. There was some level of, you know, there were some Republicans who were frankly incompetent in 2003 and 2007 that were on our ticket. The voters figured that out and elected the Democrats. And then they, you know, for example, Crit Llewellyn twice ran against a woman by the name of Linda Greenwell, who was just not qualified to be state auditor. And even though in 2003 it was a good year for Republicans, the Crit was able to win that race. And then 2007, it was a good year to be a Democrat, so she didn't have as much concern. And so, you know, for somebody like me, I was in the middle of this. So I was a general election candidate. I had never actually had a primary. And then in 2010 rolls around, I'm now finding myself in a primary, and I'm just the wrong. It just wasn't something I was as comfortable with. It wasn't something that my brand existed or brand had been developed. And so nowadays, where you look at these state legislative races, gosh, a huge percentage of them are essentially primary election component. You know, that's where it's settled. On the Democratic side, there's just a bunch of districts in Louisville and Lexington that the Republicans just do not have a chance. And, there's a few swing districts, but not that many. And so if 90% of the seats are determined in a primary, you're going to get candidates who appeal to the who votes in a primary, which is a low number. So that creates, the one thing that is still helpful at the state level as compared to the federal level is you still have to balance the budget. And that does force some level of compromise, although it's really compromise inside the party, not so much, across party lines. The areas that I've seen in Frankfurt where there is some level of work across party lines are in I call it the sin issues, gambling, liquor, that sorts of things, because you lose some Republican voters, you need Democrats there. And then some of the criminal justice reform issues for similar reasons, you lose some of the Republicans. But right now, if you don't have a majority of the caucus, a bill doesn't get called, which gets me to the second part of the question. I think in the short run, one of the things you can do, Jim's right about the committee substitutes, even if they're done legally or pursuant to the rules, where you have a bill and it's on the bill was noticed and it was on the agenda for a sufficient number of hours, but you do these committee subs that the public certainly hasn't seen. I mean, I'll even tell you, a lot of times I'm a lobbyist, right? And there are days where I don't see the committee sub until LRC posted on the website at night. So those committee subs are not, a lot of people just don't see them. And so I think one of the things you have to do is, unfortunately, you got to weigh in earlier. Those bills don't get called to committee by rogue committee chairs. They're usually this leadership decision, and they're often and they're most always discussed in the majority caucus at some point. And so that's really, and this is unfortunate because it's, if you wait until the committee or the floor is, Jim, it's too late and the public doesn't really get to provide that input. So you got to provide that input early, but it becomes hard when you don't necessarily know what you're aiming at because of committee subs and things like that. But that's where getting to members so that they'll speak up in caucuses when the doors are closed, you might get somebody willing to say something behind a closed door that they would, but they'll say it in front of their colleagues behind a closed door that they wouldn't say in public. And that can be where you can slow things down and try to work out the issues. The other is with the committee chairs themselves, because they do often are the ones that are putting the work in on the committee subs. But it's not an ideal way to make public policy, but those are some ways to try to work around it given the world in which we live right now.
Fran, I don't know if you have any closing remarks. We do have some questions in the chat, but I know this is a weekend and you were both quite generous with your time, and I want to respect that. Fran, are there any last thoughts or thank yous?
Well, I want to thank you again. This was very thought-provoking, very helpful, and I'm not surprised by that at all because that's what you always give us, and we're deeply grateful for it. So thank you for taking time from your day, and if there's any questions that we get from the chat that weren't answered, that with your permission, we'll just email them to you, and you can
Sure.
respond if that's okay.
Yeah, or just good. Somebody can just shoot, find me. You can find me online and shoot me a note directly.
Yeah. And thank you all very much. Please keep up your important work for the Commonwealth. It is just essential. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. See y'all.
Really interesting. Well, that's a lot to think about. Both things. Okay, so Roy, we need to keep things moving along here. And if anybody needs to get a drink or something like that, but we want to go ahead and stay on time. So Soraya, I'll hand it back to you to talk about, introduce about voting rights restoration.
Thank you, Fran. Just a reminder that after this program, we will have the breakout rooms. So you'll have a little bit of a window there also to take a break, although I do hope you'll take time to be in the breakout room. So I look forward to Cindy and Tip's presentation. I've got your slides up. Please go when you're ready.
Great. Thank you very much, Soraya. Before we start, I want to be sure to recognize the really good work of Ed Monahan, who chaired this committee up until about 2 months ago. He was very dedicated to the issue, very knowledgeable. He really guided our work. And I think we want to recognize that. This issue of restoring voting rights is going to be our key issue in the 23 legislative session. And I was glad to hear Trey say that this is one issue where we might get some support for these libertarian candidates. And that means that we're going to have to do a lot of work between now and the session. And I'll get to that later in this presentation. I want to introduce Tip Moody, who's going to tell you a little bit about himself. And then he's going to do the first part of the presentation and I'll do the second part. So Tip, you're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is only my second time having the opportunity to present myself to a group such as this. I know a few of you, but most of you I do not. So I didn't write anything down because that would take me longer. And Cindy only said I just have 2 minutes, so I'll speak quickly. When I was 25 years old, I moved to DC and started a very successful career in political fundraising. I worked for men and organizations that all of you would recognize. I went on to become creative director for a direct mail agency, had some independent work. I even got to ride down Pennsylvania Avenue on Inauguration Day, but I will not specify which Inauguration Day that was. But you know, the 80s were a very social decade, and I was a very social fellow. It wasn't uncommon to have our 3 martini lunches, but then we would go in the evening. And in 1989, yes, that's very important, 1989, I was introduced to methamphetamine. And that started another social element of my life, which didn't conclude until 29 years later. I came back to Kentucky in 2000, spent several years at UK working for ag and dentistry and managing their grant accounts. But in 2017, spring and summer, I was pulled over by local police for unrelated issues, not directly associated with my addiction, but I happened to have something on me. I was arrested twice in a matter of months. And in 2018, I became a convicted felon. Judge Goodwine was very kind to me. But the unfortunate thing is, I thought that I was still smarter than everybody else in the world, which is, you know, definition of an addict. So 3 months after I was sentenced and became a convicted felon, I was arrested again on a misdemeanor possession charge and sent to the Fayette County Detention Center for 90 wonderful days. Well, got out, did everything that Judge Goodwine said I had to do. I was released from probation 6 months early. And shortly after that, that happened in October of 2019. And in December, Governor Beshear signed his executive order, which gave me my eligibility to gain my voting rights back. So this is an issue that I am personally and passionately involved with. I often speak plainly about it. I am unapologetic for that. And there's 3 things that I want y'all to know about this voting rights restoration effort. The first is we don't all look alike. I know that when you hear ex-offender, convicted felon, whatever, something automatically pops into your head. Well, let me tell you, what you're probably thinking about ain't so, okay? Second one, the criminal justice arm of our judicial system has, for all of us, imposed a sentence. We have served those sentences out, and we want to become an active and participatory citizen again. This was easy for me because my sentence was not quite as harsh as some others. But the important thing to remember about voting rights restoration is that until this happens and is made permanent, society, our legislators, and you know, depending on how you vote when you go to the polls, all of us here, society continues to impose this sentence on us. It is one that we continue to carry, and that has to go away. Third thing is, don't think that your involvement in your local league doesn't matter. My involvement with the Lexington League came about simply by virtue of a letter to the editor, an opinion piece written by Jen Jackson that appeared in the Jessamine Journal. There was a phone number I called, we spoke, the rest is history. So whatever you can do in your local communities, don't think that there might not be someone watching or reading or listening, because the chances are you're wrong. Next slide, Troy. Voting rights basics. Kentucky is one of 3 states in the country that ban persons with felony convictions from ever voting again. Now, the current circumstance is different than this because the governor has issued his executive order, which grants some of us our rights back. In 2006, you can see the numbers on your screen. I will say that the governor's executive order, it was not quite, did not go as far as it could have. If you have a conviction in another state or a federal conviction, or there are many carve-outs for which you are not eligible. And I say this as an ex-offender. The governor, he issued his executive order with low-hanging fruit. There were things that he could have done that he chose not to do, but we are thankful and grateful for what he did do. Next slide, please, Troy. Kentuckians banned from voting. 2020 data. We don't have any more recent data. Hopefully by the end of this year, we will have that. It will be aggregated and distributed in a new report. But 6% of the voting age population of Caucasian citizens in Kentucky cannot vote. 15% of the African-American voting age population in Kentucky cannot vote. As you can see, this is more than double the national rate. And 6% of our Hispanic voting age population is banned from voting. Next slide, please, Troy. And the league has been really, really active in the past few years. And I know that y'all have been doing this way before I got involved. But in January of 2021, the league released this beautiful report. It was a legislative report on felony disenfranchisement in the Commonwealth. It's available on the state's website. I suggest if y'all haven't read it, it's easy to read. It doesn't deal just with the Commonwealth, but other states as well. And it is a true wealth of information. Next. We have obtained polling data in December of 2020. We commissioned Mason-Dixon Polling. They provided us with answers to 6 basic questions, the most important of which is that 67% of all those surveyed agree that voting rights restoration should be automatic when a sentence is complete. Next, please. And what have we done? We have sought recognizable support from others in Kentucky and without. This should be a slide of John Legend. His Free the Vote provided us with a video of support supporting voting rights in Kentucky.
Oh, wait a minute, but go back and show that video, please, Soraya.
Something special happens when people get their right to vote restored after serving their time. And contrary to popular belief, it doesn't help one party or another. It helps everyone. Whether you live in a rural, suburban, or urban place, all of our communities benefit when more people participate. It gives people a chance to have a say in their futures, in our future. And it helps keep communities safer. Folks who've served their time deserve a second chance to enjoy true freedom. And part of freedom is having the right to vote in our elections. In my church, I was taught about the power of forgiveness and redemption. We have all needed a second chance at some point. So Kentucky, let's extend a second chance to those who completed their sentences and want to use their sacred right to vote.
In addition to John Legend, we have received support from New Ventures, which we discussed at the very beginning of the meeting. They provided us with support on Facebook with some ads that we'll see here in a minute. The Association of Probation and Parole, the American Probation and Parole Association, APPA, they gave us a letter of support, which was distributed to every legislator back in this past General Assembly. The Marshall Project has also provided us support, as well as Secure Democracy and, of course, the Sentencing Project. And one other vital piece of support that we have received, next slide, please. Sorry, has been from Cameron Mills. Cameron has been very generous with his time and his support. He has provided us with this in writing, and he has also provided us with a 30-second video. Next slide, please. We have created and produced 4 of our own videos. I am in one of them. Deborah Grainer, who was on in the meeting earlier today, is one. Cameron Mills is one. And Alonzo Malone, a Black gentleman from E-Town, who was unable to vote for 30 years, is the 4th video. We hope to maybe be able to have the funds to create another video before the General Assembly next year. Next, please.
Wait. We want to show that video. Back up. This is just a 30-second video, but it's good.
I'm not your typical face of a felon. In 2010, I got myself into some criminal trouble and I lost my right to vote. So I've continued working on voting rights restoration because I feel it's a really important leg up for anyone who's had a criminal activity in their past, to help them heal, to help them come back and be a participating and proud citizen of where they live here in Kentucky.
And I'll add that each of our videos has a different emphasis and a different tenor to it. So we tried to address the questions that Mason-Dixon conducted in their polling for us, so that we would have a video that addressed in loose terms each of those questions. Next, please. We also created GIFs and banner ads that we use very successfully in digital media buys during the end of the General Assembly. There's me and Deb.
Next slide.
And now I will turn it over to my dear friend and league colleague, Cindy Nine.
Thanks, Chip. Great information. Our goal in the 2023 session is a constitutional amendment that would read like this. This was the language in Senate Bill 223 that was proposed by Senator Gerald Neal this year. It did not go anywhere this year, but I do want to say that in 2020, this language was in a bill that almost passed. It had support from both chambers. It had support from the leadership, and COVID interrupted, and that was the end of this bill, which was really unfortunate. Next slide. In order to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot and passed, the House and Senate have to pass it by 3/5 vote of the elected members, not those voting, but the elected members. And then voters must adopt it in the next election when it's on the ballot by a majority vote. Very heavy lift. And so that's why it's taken so long, I think, to get this going. Next slide, please.
Cindy, you may want to explain why it takes a constitutional amendment.
The reason we want a constitutional amendment is because the Constitution is where we have the rule right now that says anyone with a convicted felony loses their civil rights. Governors can change that, as Governor Bashir did in 2019, but we know from history that some governors are very reluctant to pardon anyone and give them their voting rights back. And so that's not a good way to get this to happen. The only permanent fix is to amend the Constitution. Thanks, Fran. What can we do? Local leagues and local members can have a really important impact. First thing we're going to suggest is that if you're holding candidate forums or any kind of candidate issues, and we'll want to do this and vote for 1-1, we want to ask if they would support legislation that would restore voting rights. So that's one thing to think of for you local leaders who are working with candidates. Next slide, please. The second thing we want everybody to do is to get to know your legislators now before the 2023 session begins. So as Trey suggested, getting to know people now, talking to them, finding out what their interests are, and asking them this question is going to be really important. Right now, we know who some of our legislators are. If they don't have an opponent in the general election, for those who have an opponent, you'd want to wait until after the election to connect with those legislators. But find out who your legislators are. Your districts may have changed, so you may be in new districts, and find out whether or not they're opposed in the coming election, and then follow that election. Once you know who those legislators are, call their legislative office. It may be a little tough for those who aren't already elected because they won't have an office in Frankfurt. So give us a call and we'll help you figure out how to connect with them. And next slide, please. What we want you to do is, if at all possible, sit down face-to-face or sit down in a Zoom meeting. First thing to ask is, what are your legislative priorities? Find out what their interests are, and then talk to them about this issue. Share the talking points that you will find in one of the handouts in the materials that we've sent you. Tell them stories if you have them. Tip's story and Deb's story are very simply because of substance abuse issues. They ended up with felony convictions, nonviolent convictions. And, you know, the gentleman who we videotaped earlier for 30 years couldn't vote because of something he'd done as a kid. Silly mistake, stupid thing to do, but he lost his voting rights. That's just not fair. So tell stories if you've got them. Ask them if they would support an amendment to restore voting rights. And once sentencing is complete, that's important. And then if they would support it, ask if they would sign on as a co-sponsor. They probably will not tell you whether they would or wouldn't. A few might because they've already done it. But we want them to start thinking about if they'd support it, would they co-sponsor? And then thank them and then let us know what you learned. So we really need your help in every part of the state, connecting with these folks. And if you talk to them and meet them before the session begins, they will pay more attention when you go and talk to them or send them a message during the legislative session. Here are the basic talking points. Almost 200,000 men and women in Kentucky can't vote. Kentucky's one of only 3 states that bans them completely. 15% of our voting age African Americans cannot vote. And the only real solution is the constitutional amendment. Next slide. We have been promised by the chairman, Senator Whitney Westerfield, that he will hear a potential bill on this issue in the Judiciary Committee during the interim. We're going to be contacting him this month to begin finding a date when he will do that. These are the members of that committee. And if these folks are in your district or represent you, it's especially important for you to reach out to them. Those who are starred, I think I've got this right, are not coming back. They have either resigned, they're running for other offices, or they're just not going to run again. But keep in mind that these folks are going to be hearing, and they'll be important later in decisions about whether this gets heard and gets passed. Next slide. We have lots of resources for you. The reports, the polling data, the 5 videos, maybe another one. We have flyers that we showed and Tip mentioned. You've got the talking points. We've got artwork for posters. We have a tabletop display that we can get to you that you could carry with you for tabling or voter registration drives. And then we're going to be creating a QR code where people can check the office in Frankfurt, where they can check their eligibility and register to vote if they have a nonviolent conviction. So many of you, as you register voters, run across people say, oh, I can't do that, I can't vote. Well, now we can ask them, if they have a nonviolent conviction, let's check and see if you can actually register now. Let's see if you've been pardoned. So all of these resources will be available to you. We haven't figured out the easiest way to make them available. If you've got suggestions about how to get them to you, let us know. We can also send them to you if you just email us at info@lwvky.org. So suggestions for how you would like to get these, let us know. Next slide. Questions? I haven't checked chat, so.
I have been monitoring. I have not seen any questions. There's some information about using Outreach Circle, and Weta also says if you need some contact info, she may have it as well.
Yeah, Weta has gotten a lot of good information as she's checked out candidates for Vote 411. Next slide, please. So here's our contact information. I think that's the last slide. If you want to reach out to us individually, that would be fine. Anyway, we appreciate your attention, but this will be our #1 priority during the session. And we can use your help beginning right now.
May I make one last comment, please?
Sure.
Ed kind of made me a de facto casting director and executive producer for our videos, and for locating people, anyway. So we have a wide variety of people here from all over the Commonwealth. Your spheres of influence will be really critical in helping us with this. So if in your day-to-day lives, you know of someone who has a felony conviction in his or her past and would like to participate in this effort, we need men and women like me who can speak to this issue personally. So let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So now, thank you. You guys are like 1 minute over. You did it. You did a great job and you got lots of good information. Thank you so much. Now we're going to have some time for the breakout rooms. I am going to stop the recording for the breakout rooms.
And so
this meeting is being recorded.
right. And so we're back to the business meeting. Jules, if you will do the approval of the budget. And remember, the only thing that we're approving is the education fund budget. The special projects doesn't need approval. Soraya, if you'll put up the education fund budget. And
yes, I am. Someone seems to have taken the host away from me. I may need to.
I did, Soraya, I got a weird message, and so it may have, when we came back from the breakout rooms, maybe it switched it to me or something. Let me check.
Yeah, because it says for me to join now. I mean, if you can launch the poll, that would be great.
Well, it told me that the poll, I got a warning saying that the poll was not active because I'm logged in on another computer, which is weird.
Yeah, that's actually what I got too. I'm a little nervous to sign out. I guess I could and join and see if that will help. But
Jen, and I have also been considered a host, and at one point I did let somebody in, and I did do another thing, but I didn't think I undid you. How do I let you back in, Soraya?
Yeah, and you shouldn't have had to let anybody in. That's a little worrisome.
Can you just make Cindy?
That was a long time ago.
Just make her a co-host, Cindy.
Yeah.
You see where you can make Soraya a co-host?
Soraya, are you the League of Women Voters host? It says you're the host.
Well, maybe it's another. I think we may all be signed in on the.
Oh, maybe it doesn't like that. I'll log out. I'll try to log in as I'll sign in as a guest or whatever. I'll register as a guest. You might need to do that too, Cindy.
If you make her co-host, you can also make her host, and then she'll have complete control of the meeting again.
It just says reclaim host, so I'm not a host anymore.
Yeah, and I'm not getting that message to be able to reclaim. So, I'm not sure what actually happened there.
So I'm going to log out and come back in.
All right.
When we're so near the end.
I know. Now here's another thing we could do. We could go old school here. We could just go,
just raise our hands. I believe we could do that too. If we can't do the exact poll, I think we could. I doubt very much that we're going to have really, really close votes here.
Yeah, I vote for just being old school.
Yeah. This is Harriet. I agree. But looking at the list, there are several people with their mics open right now. And maybe everybody except the Fran and Soraya could mute their sound.
Well, that might help. All right, well then, I guess, Jules, let's just go ahead and do the budget.
Right. I am supposed to present this motion. I move that the Education Fund Budget 2022-2023 proposed by the Budget Committee be approved.
All right, the motion has been made and it's made by a committee, so it doesn't require a second, but we can still have discussion. Is there any discussion on the Education Fund budget before we vote? Don't see any hands.
I've got a question. I know she asked for the budget to be approved. Could she also say in the amount of what the amount is for the record?
Jules, would that be okay? If you make the motion and
well, sure. Let me see.
I've got it on screen if that would help, Jules.
Well, no, it's the other.
You need to put up the ed fund.
I have the amount in front of me.
Okay.
It's $29,532.73.
Okay.
If you want to add that to the motion.
All right. So that is the motion. Anything else? All right, all in favor, and you get to raise your hand, raise your hand. There's just a little thing down there. And then are there any opposed? Raise your hand. Any opposed?
I didn't raise my hand, but I'm in favor of it. Terry Barnes, Louisville.
Right. All right. So I see a few hands still up, but I think it's because you don't know how to take it down.
I think that that's why the poll worked better. The poll.
Can we just hold up our hands? Can we just hold up our hands?
Well, we could, but I don't know if we can see everybody. That's the problem.
A voice vote might just be best.
Maybe we do a voice vote. Everybody turn your,
Let me ask you a question
unmute
before you do
yourselves.
it. It's a parliamentary procedure, aren't you? When you do a voice vote, aren't you supposed to have a number, so many yay, so many nay?
On the budget.
Robert's Rules of Order?
No, on the budget, we just need a majority.
No, I don't. Obvious majority.
Right. Pat, did you want to say something?
No, I don't think there's any problem. The only reason, I mean, I think you'd have to count it if you couldn't tell by listening. But if it's clear.
I'm just saying for the record, just to keep it clean. And some of us may not hear better than others. I don't hear.
Right.
If
we could
there's
record
no
no
nay,
votes
can we just-
only, assuming that it'll be mostly yays.
Isn't there only a requirement that only the delegates can vote?
Right.
Right. We already talked about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we already did that. Well, let's try a voice vote, and if there's any nays, then we'll try to figure out a way to do the count. All in favor of approval of the education fund budget as presented by Jules, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? And if you're opposed, make sure that you've clicked off that your mute isn't on. Any opposed? All right, the motion is clearly carried. All right, thank you. Sorry it's not working as smoothly as we anticipated, but I guess we had to have one glitch in this whole thing before we ended. So this happened to be it, our polling. All right, let's go then to the nominating committee. Karen.
Karen, are you possibly on mute?
I just fixed it.
Okay.
Is there a way you can just put the nominees back up quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They were up earlier in the meeting, but
yeah, no, Is this it? That's what I have from you.
okay, I'm not seeing it.
Oh, that's
No,
because
we're
of-
not
sorry. I forgot to share. I can see it. I don't know why you guys can't.
Okay, so as chairperson of the nominating committee, I move that the secretary cast the ballot for every candidate nominated to hold the office of director of the board for a 2-year term, starting July 1st, 2022, ending June 30th, 2024.
All right, we have a motion. Again, we don't need a second. Well, I have to ask, are there any nominations from the floor that anybody wants to make from the floor? You can nominate someone with their consent at this point as a director. Not seeing any, we'll proceed with the vote, and we'll do it verbally again. All in favor of the slate of directors, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right, that slate of directors, that carries. All right.
And would you put the list back up there again, please?
Yeah, can you put the list back up, Soraya? There they are. And you should.
So I have an additional motion, and that is that we move that the nominating chairperson for the remainder of the 22-23 fiscal year be Pat Morrell.
All right, we have a second motion would anybody else want to propose a candidate for that position? Hearing none, we'll proceed to the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, thank you. Thank you, Karen, for the nominating committee report. Okay, Harriet, now we go to the bylaws change.
Right. I don't know, Trey, are you going to post that?
Yep.
Thank you. As a member of the bylaws committee, I move that the name of the league's 501c3 corporation be changed from the League of Women Voters of Kentucky Education Fund, Inc. to the League of Women Voters of Kentucky, Inc. And that will become our main operating entity.
All right. I
move, yeah, we don't need a.
No, you made the motion. We do not require a second. And so we will proceed with the vote. Again, it's a verbal one. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Okay, any opposed? All right, the bylaw change is adopted. Very good, thank you. All right, now we move to the program. Bonnie.
So Roy, did you put can you put the program?
Yep,
I did.
I'm putting it back.
Okay. Okay. I move that we approve the 5 areas for our program for next league year.
All right, the motion has been made that the program be adopted as it appears on the screen. And again, we don't need a second. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Discussion?
Aye.
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 Fran, there was a call for discussion.
All right.
Yeah.
I did hear a call for discussion, and it is my fault for not saying it's been proposed. Is there any discussion? Okay, apparently not. I think we're discussed out. Okay. All right, let's try this again. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? Any opposed? All right, the program is adopted. Well, with that, I believe we've completed the business at hand, and I can. So in closing, I want to thank everyone who helped make today's meeting, all the presenters, Soraya most particularly, who put so much work and time into this, but all of the presenters and all of you for giving up your willingness to share time on this Saturday in June to demonstrate your really willingness to defend democracy. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And I'm thinking today particularly of Ruth Strauss from Lexington, who recently turned 100 and is a lifetime member. She and so many others have paved the way for the work that is before us. And so let us now take that rich legacy to build an ever stronger League of Women Voters of Kentucky. So thank you, thank you. Now we do have directions to the board that you can put in the chat. If there's anything that you would like to put before the board that you would like us to consider, to act on, and anything that you would want to say directly to board members, please put it in the chat, and we'll try to address that then. And finally, just a note to the board members, if you'll stay on this Zoom, because we haven't had enough meeting. We've got to have a quick board meeting following this annual meeting. So if you'll just stay on, I promise you it'll be very quick, but we need to have a meeting. But for all the rest of you, have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and thank you so much for joining us.
And Fran,
Thank
do we
you.
need an official